Who is the rudest celeb you've met? What happened? Tommy Lee Jones. I was working as a security guard on the movie shoot for The Hunted. My second week on the job, I was posted in front of Tommy Lee Jones and Benicio del Toro's trailers on his side street in a residential area. Basically, just stand there all day and make sure nobody F's with anything. Day one was fine. I was there all day and never saw Tommy Lee Jones. Benicio came and went throughout the day and was super nice. He even came out and had a chat once. It was a trip because I had just seen him on TV the prior week accepting an Oscar. I congratulated him on that and he was thankful. Just seemed like an alright dude that wasn't all up his own ass. Day 2 was a different story. I come in at 10 a.m. and relieve the overnight person. I'm standing there and this dog comes trotting up to me, super friendly. I assumed it was a neighborhood dog that got out. It just kind of hung out with me for about 20 minutes until an SUV comes flying down the street and stops right before the barricade. I see an old man hop out the back. He points and yells, "Hey!" and is walking toward me with a purpose. "Get the F away from my dog!" It's at this point I realize it's Tommy Lee Jones. I put my hands up and I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was your dog." I don't know if he heard me, but he walked right up to me with his driver right behind him, ready to pull him back if he has to. He puts his finger in my chest and says, "Why is she out? Who let my dog out?" I tried to tell him that she was out when I got there and I had no idea it was even his dog. But I was only 20 and just completely scared out of my mind, so I was stuttering and stammering and he kept interrupting me, demanding answers. By then, a few more of his people had gathered around and someone got a hold of my boss. Then my phone rang and it was my boss telling me to just go home for the day and it would get handled. I went home and called him later, asking if I should still come in tomorrow. He said, "Nope, you don't work here anymore." I tried explaining everything, but there was no getting through. So Tommy Lee Jones got me fired from a job for something I was not responsible for. Story 2. This happened in the early 1990s. I handled security at a large corporate hotel in a Canadian city. Any big-name group that performed in our city stayed at our hotel. I was escorting Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers from their guest floor to the lobby for their limo one morning at 4:30. I'm 6'5", and when Miss Parton approached me as I stood outside of the elevator, she said in her sweet Southern Belle voice, "Y'all sure grow 'em big up here in Canada." She touched my arm in a friendly manner. She was just as sweet as pie. I blushed and instantly forgot everything about my job. Kenny did not even look at me as he boarded the elevator. I had put the elevator into individual use so it would stay on the floor with the doors open, but taken the keys with me. When it was time to descend to the lobby, in my flustered state, I had forgotten which of the roughly 30 keys on the ring controlled that elevator, despite having worked there for several years. There was a long pause while I searched the key ring, key by key, 2 or 3 times. Kenny was glaring at me the whole time, barely concealed rage bubbling just under the surface. I finally got the right key, but when I went to put the elevator back into group service, in my haste I fumbled and dropped the keys. Kenny made a louder, exasperated sound, but Dolly came to my defense, touching my arm again and saying, "Sugar, you just take your time. We're in no hurry." Kenny made another noise, but Dolly shushed him. We eventually made it to the lobby, and I escorted them to the carport in their waiting limo. Kenny never even looked at me as he walked out the door and got into the car. Dolly, however, stopped to chat with me for a bit, thanking me, and then tipped me a 100 USD bill. That was more than I made in a day back then. She did the same for the bellmen who had brought their luggage down. Total class act. That was my most favorite and least favorite celebrity at the same time. Story 3. Haven't met too many celebs, but I gotta say that Bill Nye the Science Guy was the rudest. I grew up in Seattle, and I ran into him with my dad when I was really young, and he was setting up for a shoot for that show down on Elke Beach. I was a huge nerd, and he was one of my heroes because of that show. My pops told me to go say hello, so I did, and Bill responded something along the lines of, "Get out of here, kid, we're busy, where are your parents at?" And I pointed at my pa across the beach and was like, "Right over there." Bill told me to leave him alone. I was devastated. Mind you, I was like 6 or 7. On the other hand, I met Woody Harrelson and Willie Nelson on separate occasions when I was a bit older, 22 or 23, and living on my own in Maui. They were both super nice. They were both stoned, as was I when I met them. When I met Woody, I was working at Mana Foods stocking shelves, and Woody walked down the aisle I was stocking. His eyes were squints that were red as hell, and when I saw him coming, I just said, "Hey, Woody, how's it going?" And he responded with, "Hey, what's up, man? It's good, how are you?" We had a little conversation before he got back to what he was doing and I got back to work. It felt like a genuine, chill meeting with someone I respect. So the moral I'm getting from this story is that when celebrities are high, they are quite sociable. as are most people. So maybe the next time you decide to meet your hero or a celebrity, just offer them a joint as a peace offering before you have your conversation. Story 4. Stephen Baldwin and Chad Michael Murray both tried to get stuff for free and pulled the "Do you know who I am" for something that was $5. Baldwin also gave his number to a teenage coworker, and we called it to see if it was real, not even thinking about caller ID. He spent the next year randomly calling her. My favorite celebrity encounter was making a smoothie for Gordon Ramsay. He was super nice and said he would be back later to get his friend something. The friend was David Beckham, who was also super nice, and they stayed and took pictures with everyone. So, this isn't the first time I've heard of Gordon Ramsay actually being like a jam-up nice dude, when just meeting random people of the public. He definitely pushes that, angry jerk face boss angle, for the cameras and for television and all that. And that's not to say that, he doesn't have, the capability to blow up on people like that. But, just kind of running into someone randomly in the streets. I know several people that have run into him and they said, he's just a delight, as they say in the UK. Story 5. Jared Leto is a piece of crap. Aside from being an outright weirdo and an awkward human being, he's a predator and a groomer. He harassed, stalked, and attempted to sexually prey on a friend of mine. When she refused his advances, he turned the dial from 100 to 1,000, and mind you, this was after one meeting and no sexual contact or lead from her. When she tried to inject a male friend in the situation, he was vehemently opposed to this. Hundreds of phone calls and texts. Avoid at all costs. Edit. I didn't get on Reddit for a day and am overwhelmed by the comments, so I'll up some questions here. This happened 10 plus years ago in a Midwest city. She was approached the day of, or before, I'm not sure, his band was playing, was a bit starstruck by him, and was invited to his show. The situation rattled her, but she made it out of this situation relatively unscathed for how things could have gone. Being who she is, she was able and equipped to handle stuff like this. However, it's always bothered me that any woman younger, more impressionable, or in a different state of mind could have quickly been taken advantage of and assaulted in much worse ways. As a man, this gave me a lot of perspective and made me a lot more diligent about being aware of my surroundings when I'm in public with my woman friends. Be careful out there. Not everyone has bad intentions, but make sure you're safe. Story 6. BJ Novak. I used to cook/bartend at a local dive bar when I was in college. He came and did a comedy set for the students. He bombed. It was awful. After the show, I went in for the late night shift. As I'm standing there behind the door, clocking in and getting ready to head back to the kitchen, in walks BJ and sits down at the bar looking completely bummed. Our main bartender goes over to talk to him. He sneered at our menu and asked for things that he knew we would never have. This was where the broke college kids and even more broke townies drank. The fact that we offered more than one vodka was a miracle. He finally picked something and the bartender asked to see his ID. Keep in mind that this is a college town bar. We carded everyone that ordered a drink, regardless of how old they looked. There were signs saying this in about 8 different places. BJ lost it. He completely blew up on our bartender, cussing him out and saying things like, "Do you know who the F I am? I'll buy this place and fire the whole effing staff." Our bartender knew exactly who he was, but was quick enough to say, "You look like some sort of off-brand Seth Meyers. Either show me your ID or get the F out." He did eventually show his ID and went to sit in some corner. Every now and then, he'd make a rude comment to a server walking by. When he tried to order another round, the bartender cut him off and kicked him out. Story 7. No surprise, but Bill Cosby. A few months before all the allegations came out, he did a show at the place I worked at. He refused to do sound and lighting checks or even leave his dressing room before the show. When the show started, he came out and berated the sound and lighting guys for about 15 minutes until it was to his liking. It wasn't like a humor thing. It was him basically yelling at the techs while the crowd kind of looked on in horror. He was also a huge dick to all of us crew. My bosses took their job seriously because on a small show like that, we might make $5K in profit after all the bills were settled. We had pictures in our lobby of all past performers. Cosby had performed before, but a few days after the show, we took down his picture in the lobby. On a side note, someone stole the picture of Bill Clinton we had hanging up. Zach Brown Band was probably one of the nicest groups to come through while I was there. Was nice and respectful to all us local crew, and even invited some of the students that were in the building on stage during sound check to get autographs and hang out for a few minutes. Story 8. Not so much rude, but here's 2 times my family had run-ins with celebrities. My family sold a boat to Jack Hanna several years ago. He came with his wife to our home to check it out and bought it with cash. It was a John boat, so like $300. Nothing crazy. They hung out with us and shot the crap like any regular person would. I had a pet tarantula at the time, and he saw it and was like, "Awesome setup for a rosehair." I get it, he's literally a zoologist, but it blew my adolescent mind he knew what species it was offhand. Him and his wife are super down to earth and nice people. My dad installed a car phone in the tour bus of David Copperfield many moons ago. His staff timed it where my dad would be in the bus while David was in rehearsals for a show, but the rehearsals didn't last as long as they anticipated, and he came back to the bus while my dad was finishing the install. He waited outside, and when my dad came out of the bus, there he was. Now, mind you, this is middle of afternoon, dead-ass July summertime heat in a deep southern state. Copperfield is wearing a full-length fur coat. My dad, in all his awkward glory, asks, "Ain't you hot in that?" My dad says he looked at him dead in the eyes, all serious-like, and goes, "You never know what's up my sleeves," and gives a small smile. 4 months later, we received a manila envelope with 5 hand-signed and personalized headshots of him. My dad was blown away because after the sleeve comment, he chatted with my dad for a little bit, then whisked off back to rehearsals. My dad says he only mentioned the family in passing during the conversation and didn't remember giving Copperfield or his staff our names, and especially our home address. Yet, each headshot had our names correctly spelled, and each had a different little personal message. Absolutely bonkers, and this was in the late 90s, before social media, and the internet became what it is today. Story 9. 2 Gems and a Horror. Judi Dench, who was lovely, quite a twinkle in her eye, and just totally charming, and just as you'd imagine and hope her to be. Going back a long time, but in the early 1990s, I had a friend in London, HIV positive, who was in hospital and very unwell. Not really thought he'd be alive for more than a month or two. Hospital staff were lovely, and visiting was pretty much as and when, just as long as you were quiet if it was late. I'd gone to visit him after a very long workday, and was gowned up and chatting quietly to him. It was probably around midnight, and one of the nurses asked if he was up to another visitor, which he was. Princess Diana turned out to be the other visitor, and she was lovely beyond belief. Absolutely beautiful, very compassionate, and all on her own. One security guard who was with the nurse. She stayed for around an hour and was so obviously irregular. The nurses said she often came in late at night, just slipping in with no fuss or fanfare and staying several hours at a time. I met her several times before my friend finally died, and she was always unfailingly kind and gentle. I summoned up the courage to ask why she did this so much. In those days, gay men, particularly HIV-positive ones, were often sidelined and looked down on. She was quite matter-of-fact in that she could offer something to people who didn't have much else, and it made her feel grounded in what was a very turbulent life to do it. After David had died and I went to collect his belongings, there was a card with a letter in it from her for me. I don't think I'll ever forget it, and I used to get angry with people who took against her. She wasn't perfect, I'm sure, but to me she was a lovely and wonderful lady. To keep up with the general theme, though, and to echo others, Celia Black was a complete female dog of the first order, and I don't really know anyone who ever had a good word to say about her. She lived not that far from my parents when I was a teenager, and was notorious in the village for her appalling attitudes. Story 10. It's neck and neck between Demi Moore and Robert Duvall for me, but I'll tell the Robert Duvall story. He was in Jacksonville filming part of Days of Thunder, or Staying Here, related to the movie, circa 1989/early 1990. I was 10 years old. My family and I were out to a rare-for-us dinner at one of the nicer restaurants in the Jacksonville Landing, R.I.P. My dad, a huge Godfather 1 and 2 fan, immediately recognized him, leaned into the table, and excitedly but quietly said to my mom, "That's Robert Duvall from The Godfather." He saw my parents look over and made a nasty face, waved the waiter over and whispered something to him. The waiter shook his head, and Robert Duvall became visibly angry and slammed his fist on the table. The waiter said something back to him and shook his head again, and then Robert Duvall stood up, threw some money on the table, and left. I can only assume that Robert Duvall was an incredible a-hole to the waiter before we got there, because the waiter later came over with a bottle of wine for my parents and said, "Compliments of Mr. Duvall. He overpaid." On the way out, my dad and the waiter chatted for a few minutes, and on the way home in the car, my dad told my mom that Robert Duvall tried to get us kicked out because my dad recognized him and he didn't want to be bothered. All we did was look in his direction. Story 11. I'll always take an opportunity to crap on this guy. Val Kilmer. My friends went to his speaking tour, which was essentially a Q&A when he came to Australia. It was effing Val Kilmer, so tickets weren't exactly cheap. Out comes Val looking like he doesn't want to be there. First thing he says? Not hello, but literally, don't take photos of me. My friend was lucky enough to be the first on the mic to ask the first question, but he didn't get to because Val spent the next 5 to 8 minutes trying to bully my friend into asking his question using a Japanese schoolgirl's voice. My friend kept refusing, but Val just wouldn't let up. My friend was disappointed and effing hates Val now. For the rest of the Q&A, Val had this hostile attitude because it was clear he didn't want to be there and answered every question in that same tone. One person asked if he liked the Doors music before he played Jim Morrison. Val responded by saying he only took that role for the money. I've heard him talk about that role in the past many times. Every time he was quite enthusiastic, so he was clearly just effing with this crowd. I usually don't judge celebs when they give not so enthusiastic interviews because press seems like a chore, but this was his speaking tour. The disrespect towards his fans who paid money to see him is such an idiot move. I know he goes on Reddit quite a bit, so I hope he sees this. Hey Val, F you. Story 12. Many years ago, I had a chance meeting with actor Sean Penn in Paris. It was late night, and he was all by himself at the hotel bar in the lobby. I happened to be in the bar as well. I recognized him and just approached and said hello and told him that I admired his work. He asked me to take a seat, and then we spoke about things for about 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe more, but I don't remember as I was in absolute awe of a major Hollywood star. He was polite and seemed interested in my views as he listened to them. I felt like I could have stayed for some more time. However, I thought it's best to not overstay my welcome, so I got up and thanked him for his time and left. Over the years, I've read accounts and anecdotes of people on the internet, which makes me think Sean is a recluse and a grumpy guy, so I thought I should share a rather pleasant experience with him. Who knows, maybe I caught him on a good day, lol. Story 13. I work in corrections. Nicki Minaj's brother was on trial for child SA and SA, found guilty doing life. Nicki, real name Anika Mirage, was the most entitled visitor I've ever had to deal with. She was expecting unlimited time with her brother as well as a private section to not be with the public. She was extremely condescending and expected her personal bodyguards to enter the room with her. She had become so insufferable that we had to find officers who knew her from back in the day to come have a little talk with her to straighten out her attitude, or else we were going to have to bar her from visiting. Just to clarify how officers would know her, Nicki is from Hempstead, Long Island, which is one town over from the jail. So a fair amount of officers who lived in Hempstead their whole lives know her from childhood. This is jail. We don't give a crap who you are on the outside. In here, you're a visitor like everyone else. You have to pass a metal detector. You have to give us your ID. And if you don't have a reason to be there, then you cannot stay. You don't get extra time. No inmate gets privilege because of who you are. In fact, on a side note, the other inmates broke her brother's arm and ruptured his spleen because they know what he did. So overall, my experience with her was not positive, and if I never run into her again, that would be just fine. Story 14. My grandpa met Jim Carrey when he was filming for a few days in an alley right behind his job site. All the kids in my family were huge fans of Jim's, and my grandpa knew it. Basically, Jim just ignored everyone and seemed really mad the entire time he was there and refused to interact with people. We didn't find out until we watched the movie at home, and my grandpa told us the story years later. For me, the Kardashians. I didn't know who they were at the time. My coworker told me who they were after they had left. The mom came into my job at the time and was on her cell the entire time and would wave off people asking her if she needed help. Meanwhile, the younger two, Kylie and Kendall, destroyed the store. They kept grabbing things and asking their mom to buy it for them and then tossing it on the floor. Even big items. They hauled from the back of the store to the front and left it there. She didn't even try to parent her kids. And at checkout, she didn't load the items onto the conveyor belt at all, so I scanned her stuff and left it in her cart. She said she wanted bags, so I begrudgingly bagged the items and left them in the bagging area for her to put into her cart. She then took out her card to pay and tapped it and tried to hand it to me. I pointed to the machine and told her she had to use it. Then she slid her card and stood there as if there was nothing else to do. I think she asked me, "Why is this taking so long?" "Because you have to enter your PIN and say okay to the amount, girl." I think she filmed an episode of her show a few years later where she's shopping at a grocery store with her daughter, and they're having the best time because it's so new and fun. They're so fake. Story 15. I was unwittingly standing next to Gisele Bundchen at airport security about 12 years ago. Honestly, I didn't recognize her as anything other than very attractive. We were both in line with 5 other people. Giselle was the 6th and I was the 7th in line, with no one else behind me. An official-looking person in uniform comes over to hand out some kind of paperwork, and he only had 6 sheets of paper, and gave her the last paper, and then doesn't even look at me or say anything about the fact that I'm the only person without paperwork now. She turned to look at me, and I said, "I wonder what I did wrong." And she rolled her eyes so effing hard at me and made a sound, as if that was the worst and most embarrassing thing I could have possibly said to her. As I was stewing at her reaction and trying to come up with something funny or crappy to say, she got waved through ahead of everyone else. When I got up to the security folks, they were still like, "Oh my god, I wonder if Tom Brady is here too." And that's when I realized who she was. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but I could tell she thought she was better than everyone else and couldn't be bothered to act with a shred of humanity. Story 16. I'm going to be pretty vague regarding the circumstances about my interactions with the people I list, as I want to keep my anonymity on here. Anne Hetchy. I know it's bad form to speak ill of the dead, but the one time I met her, she was the most bitter, angry, petulant, entitled person I've ever come across. I may have caught her on a bad day, but holy crap. Ashley Tisdale. Thought her crap didn't stink and was so delusional and paranoid to the point that if you dared to, or accidentally made eye contact with her, she'd act like you were a secret paparazzi and would immediately try to cover her face with her purse or whatever she had nearby. Girl, nobody gives a F about you, please. Candace Cameron Bure, DJ Tanner. A total effing narcissist who's like a slimy as F politician. All smiles and fake niceties to strangers. Meanwhile, she's actually heartless and uncaring. She's really feeling herself and always getting high off her own supply. I was super disappointed in this one because I was the DJ Tanner stan back in the day. Her brother, Kirk, rightfully catches a lot of crap, but Candace isn't much better other than the fact that she's smart enough to know how to hide just how crappy she truly is. Meanwhile, Kirk just can't help himself. Ariana Grande. Probably the worst person I've ever met in my entire effing life, and I'm pretty sure I've literally met a serial killer or two. She's such a female dog with the biggest ego while being the most insecure person I've ever met. She's absolutely a narcissist. Her entire shtick is being quirky and down to earth, but she's anything but that. She effing hates everyone, especially her fans. Whatever personality you see from her on TV or wherever is whatever personality she's chosen for that day/week, etc. She has no idea who she is or what she wants, which is definitely not unique to her and something I think most people can relate to. But if she puts on this bullcrap fakery and everyone is like, "Oh my god, Ari's so cute!" No, babes, she's not, and if she could spit in your face, she would. I know I'm forgetting someone, but I just woke up and my brain is running on empty right now, but I'll update my list when a new one comes to mind. Despite Hollywood getting a bad rap for being nothing but a club of entitled a-holes, I've met far more genuinely nice and down-to-earth celebrities than I've ever met rude ones, and I've known/met a lot of them, living in the same neighborhoods as them. I've technically never been a part of Hollywood, and I've never been to any celebrity parties, so it's possible that me having more good interactions with celebrities than bad is because all the nice celebs I know are always off, because they were just at home being a regular person. IDK. The nicest, most wholesome and normal celebrity has to be Viola Davis. She's a real one. Viola Davis is the female version of Mr. Rogers. The most delusional but most professional celebrity has to be Joey Lawrence. This man is insane in real life, but holy crap. When the cameras start rolling, this man does not F around. He's a true professional, never forgets a line, and even if I find his real-life persona incredibly odd, I have to give him credit for acting like every single role is something that may earn him an Emmy/Oscar in the future. So he takes every role seriously, no matter how deeply unserious it is. Billy Ray Cyrus used to be a totally normal dude, so I do not recognize the weird-ass man he's turned into. Miley and Noah were always super normal kids, considering what has come out since then about their childhood, especially Miley's insane work schedule as a child. She's come out far more normal than I ever would have in that situation. I never once saw Tish, which in retrospect was probably for the best. Edit. I've remembered a bunch of random weird stuff. Not really tea, although I'm waiting to hear back from my sister to see if she can remember any gossip/tea that I've forgotten about. And I'm going to message the mods over on the pop culture sub to see if I'm allowed to make a dedicated post about celeb tea / and just stuff that isn't piping hot drama, but I think some people might find interesting interesting, and just kind of like WTF stuff about a lot of celebs. I'll leave a final edit here if/when I'm allowed to make a post over there, and if not, I'll make a final edit here about everything else I remember. Partial update/edit. Still waiting to hear back from my little sister and the other sub, but I wanted to add a couple more celeb encounters that I forgot to mention before. T-Boz from the musical group TLC. One of the nicest women I've ever met. She made me feel like she'd known me forever and she hugged me. This lady is a hugger. Genuinely nice person who's always smiling, and as someone who grew up listening to TLC, I was both shocked because at one point I wanted to be each of the three girls in the band, and was just shocked that she was so normal. Darnay Holmes, an ex-NFL New York Giant and current Las Vegas Raiders player. I knew him before he was drafted, but I knew he would be drafted. This guy has insane work ethic, would always give 150%, and was always smiling. Super laid back and chill, and always eager to learn and get better at his craft. Unfortunately, it seems like fame has changed him a bit, IMO, which is kinda sad, but not that shocking. Kirsten Dunst and her husband Jesse Plemons. Just super chill, regular as F couple. 10 out of 10. No notes. David Carradine. Met him at LAX like 15-ish years ago. He was smoking a cigarette and he looked like a weary soul. He casually started talking to me, and I think he knew that I knew he was famous, but he knew that I didn't want to bother him by saying anything, so that's why he initiated the conversation. Or maybe he had no idea that I knew who he was, and he was just that kind of guy. I was shocked when he died shortly after. That was a super weird moment because it's like, I just saw this person. Very sad. Brandy Norville, singer and actress. Really nice woman and a great mom to boot. She loves the hell out of her daughter. Andy Garcia. You know how some actors are addicted to drugs and alcohol? Andy is addicted to renovating his house. It felt like a fever dream every single time I drove over by his house month after month, year after year, and it was still being drilled and hammered and whatnot. Like, sir, what is happening? I just like to shout out OOP here for just so excitedly sharing these stories. Like, you can tell that she's just super excited and loves to gossip and, has all of these anecdotes. So definitely appreciate you. I could definitely read an entire thread of your celebrity tea. And this is coming from someone who also lives in LA and frequently interacts with people. It's really cool to see the other side of the curtain, as they say. Story 17. My husband used to run high-end boutiques in Miami and Manhattan. He was running a sunglasses/watch boutique in Manhattan in 2002 when Diddy and his entourage pulled up in two Escalades. A 16-year-old girl who worked for my husband was waiting on him, showing him a watch, and he asked her to pull more out of the case. She apologized and said store policy was only one item could be out of the case at a time, to which Sean Combs replied, quote, "You take out whatever I tell you to, female dog." My husband walked over and told her he'd take over the sale and put the watch away. Diddy goes, "What are you doing? I was going to buy that." And my husband told him he wasn't buying anything in his store, talking to his employee like that. Then Diddy said, "Don't you know who I am?" My husband said, "I don't give a F who you are. There's a sunglasses hut on the next block. Buy what you want there." And then the whole group left the store in black golf carts. He's vehemently hated Diddy for decades and feels vindicated given recent events. He will absolutely say Jamie Foxx was the best celebrity encounter he ever had, and that he was the nicest, most down-to-earth guy. Story 18. I've met a few celebs over the years, partially by luck, partially through conventions. None were particularly rude that I can recall, but here are two of my favorites. Matt Hoffman was pretty quiet and chill, but polite. I met him through a show. I worked at a large theme park in Florida, and some of the performers invited me to hang out after the show. He warmed up a bit when his buddy told him that, like them, I had to have my spleen removed, and we all laughed about it. Dave Bautista was super down-to-earth, reserved, and polite. In college, I worked at a supplement store, also in Florida, and he would come in every now and then. Usually he was polite, but kept to himself. One day, I went in to get my schedule for the next 2 weeks, and while I was shooting the crap with my manager, Bautista came in. Because I was off that day, I happened to be wearing a Rocket Raccoon shirt. He noticed it and said to me across the store, "I had a lot of fun filming that. Everybody was so cool and fun to work with. I can't wait to go back for the second one." Paraphrased. I asked him a little bit about filming the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and he opened right up. He took a photo with me, then asked me to tweet it to him because, quote, "I run my own Twitter, but my agency mostly handles my Instagram and Facebook." So later that day, I made a Twitter account just to tweet it to him, and he retweeted it shortly after. Super cool guy. Story 19. Not me, but a friend won tickets to a backstage meet and greet at a John Mellencamp concert. The winners were lined up and given strict instructions. Mellencamp would sign one item and pose for one picture, then you immediately move on. Mellencamp came out into the designated area looking very bored. He barely acknowledged the excited applause. As the line progressed, my friend heard him repeat to each fan, "Hi, thanks for coming," in response to whatever they said as he signed their stuff, then stepped back into place for the photo while the photographer directed the fan where to stand. Mellencamp did not touch any of the fans, just stood beside them with a camera-ready smile. Lather, rinse, repeat. When it was my friend's turn, he handed Mellencamp his CD cover as Mellencamp chanted, "Hi, thanks for coming." My friend said, "You really don't want to be here, do you?" That actually got the hint of a grin from Mellencamp. As he looked up at my friend and repeated, "Hi, thanks for coming," stepped into position, my friend got his photo taken and was escorted out. Story 20. I was at JFK Airport in New York City, waiting out a layover, when something surreal happened. I was just standing there, minding my own business, when I realized the guy standing right next to me had that iconic face tattoo. At first, it didn't register because he was dressed in regular clothes and seemed like just another traveler. But then it hit me. That's Mike Tyson. What really threw me off was how unassuming he looked in person. For a guy who's known for being one of the most dangerous fighters in history, he wasn't as big as I imagined. But even though he wasn't as tall as I expected, he was built like a brick wall. He was wide and solid, the kind of guy you know could flip a switch and go into full beast mode if needed. The moment I figured out it was him, it was like a switch flip for everyone around us too. All of a sudden, people started flocking toward him. Nobody really said much. There was just this weird, starstruck energy. People were hovering nearby, pulling out their phones to snap pictures, but none had the guts to actually start a conversation. It was kind of bizarre, but Tyson handled it like a pro. He stayed calm, didn't try to slip away or act irritated. He was just cool with the attention, like this sort of thing happens to him all the time, which, let's be honest, it probably does. What really blew my mind was the fact that he was completely alone. No security, no entourage, just Mike Tyson casually hanging out at the airport like he was any other guy waiting for his flight. You'd expect someone like him to have a full team with him, but nope, he was flying solo, which somehow made the whole situation even more surreal. Yeah, I'm pretty certain that Mike Tyson can look after himself if there's trouble in the streets, shall we say. No security team needed, he's alright. Story 21. Chris Noth. I directed him while recording an audition for a series of voiceovers for some TV commercials about 15 years or so ago. He was late to the session because his Law & Order shoot ran long, so he was already in a bad mood. I discussed with him what the commercials would be about and what visuals would be appearing under his voice, and he did his first take. He came off sounding very stiff and formal, when he should have sounded a bit more wry and friendly. All I said to him before the second take was to be a little more conversational. He started shouting, "Conversational? What do you mean by conversational? What the hell does that even mean? How could an actor not know what it means to be conversational? Just relax and pretend like you're talking to me, Chris, not to the people sitting on their couch at home." He eventually got it and he sounded fine by the end of the session, but he was an a-hole. Another time, in the late 80s, I was doing a radio commercial with Tom Poston, George from Newhart. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't pleasant either. I actually think he was drunk. I wasn't with him in person. I was patched into the studio where he was in LA. I'd written and produced a few commercials with him in previous years, and he was always fun to work with. Not this time. He read every line in a complete monotone, without any joy or passion at all. After the first couple of takes, I started to give him a little direction, asking him to sound a little brighter, but he kept up with the monotone. He wasn't getting it, so he eventually asked me for a line reading for how I wanted to hear the opening line. That's the last thing anyone should do with an actor, because we hired the actor for a reason. But after several bad takes, I eventually gave in and read the first few lines how I wanted to hear them. Tom seemed to grasp it, and we did another take. The first take was perfect. The second line and the rest of the script was in the same monotone. "That was great, Tom. On the second line, could you maybe..." I had to read the second line for him in the right way. The next take, the first line was awful. The second line was great. The rest of the script was awful. I wound up having to go through the script line by line before each take. He only had one usable line in each take. When the session was over, I wasn't sure I had anything usable, but miraculously, I was able to edit together a complete complete script one line at a time. Other bad celebrity experiences were with Jeffrey Holder, Tony Roberts, and Courtney Thorne-Smith. My most pleasant celebrity encounters were with Steven Weber, Kim Cattrall, Eddie McClurg, Little Richard, and Fred Gwynn. I'm pretty sure I was the last person to ever work with Fred because he died about a week later. Story 22. Detroit, 1982. I'd just seen my all-time favorite band Queen perform at Joe Louis Arena. Billy Squier was the opening act. I'm not a groupie, but I was interested in meeting band members, getting autographs and photos if possible. My friend and I waited in the lobby of the Fairline Hilton in Dearborn. We'd seen tour buses in the parking lot earlier in the day, in order to try to meet the band members. Roger and Brian were friendly and gave us quick autographs. This was around 2 a.m., before rushing to the elevator. Never saw John Deacon. Around 3 a.m. or so, Billy Squier entered the lobby with a small entourage. One of the other fans, there were only 6 of us, who was waiting, approached Billy for an autograph. I'll always remember the exasperated sigh as he waved her off like an annoying mosquito. A member of his staff said, "Please, it's been a busy night. He's tired." That encounter made me nervous in the event that Freddie or John showed up. As it turned out, Freddie and his entourage arrived around 4 a.m., and the entire group paused as we all approached him. Freddie was ever so patient. One of the fans waiting there had a homemade banner, and as he signed it, she asked him, "Did you see it?" and went on to describe where she was sitting in the arena. Freddie signed his name, and I can still hear his voice, said, Yes, of course, I saw it." When I requested an autograph, I asked, "Can you please write my name on it so folks won't think I forged it?" "Well, I can't unless you tell me your name, can I?" he replied. I remember after that encounter thinking how Billy Squier was too tired to meet a few fans, even though he'd been off the stage for many hours, and Freddie, who put on a more exhaustive show and certainly wanted nothing more than to go up to his room for some rest at that late hour, took the time to be so patient and polite with the waiting fans. Story 23. Rudest I've met was probably Scotty No Tippin' Pippin. If I'm sitting at a bar and you come sit next to me, generally speaking, I will look, say hi, nice to meet you, and all that to anyone. In his case, I'd already watched him and his friends be rude as F to the bartender, but I'm not invisible and I don't try to be. He caught my eye as I was turning to acknowledge him and sneered, then turned his back to me and stayed that way. Lawrence Fishburne was very polite and professional. Nice guy. All the gents of Iron Maiden were truly kind and friendly. Total chance meeting, and I remain a huge fan. You'd have thought that they were still a super young band, super excited to play the show that afternoon, if they weren't already in their late 50s and the show was for some 20,000 fans. Dave Weindorf and Monster Magnet was really cool and friendly. And then I met him again later and he remembered me and bought drinks. Pepper Keenan and Kirk Weinstein came to a bar I was DJing a metal night for, and they were legit amazing guys. They kept making requests, and after a few, I was playing a lot of deeper cuts from bands in the same scene/sound/vibe, and they just had a blast. They got me good and hammered by closing time and thanked me for, quote, the best night out in years. Very similar experiences with the guys in Rancid, who were all about older heavy metal and kept asking for vintage bands from 77 to 85. Great guys. Ziggy Marley is made of good human from the floor up. I bartended for years at a venue owned by his drummer, and I met and hung out with Ziggy several times. One of the kindest people I've ever met. But the best experience ever was back when I was only 18. I worked in banquet catering at a music venue, and my department handled food and drinks for bands pre- or post-show. I met a lot of musicians there, but one night I arrived to work and Conway Twitty's bus, the Twitty Bird, was in the lot. He was touring with Loretta Lynn. Now, I've been madly in love with her since I was a little kid. I'm pretty starstruck. So we do our thing of setting things up for the band and head to our post, which was just standing nearby and occasionally collecting plates and silverware and so on. Loretta and Conway roll in and get their dinner together and sit down. A moment later, they called us over and told us that we needed to get some food and sit down because this isn't fancy and we don't like fancy anyway, and we're not going to have you two standing there while we eat. I ran to check with the manager on duty and was told, if the band wants anything, you do it. Go get some food and sit down. Neither of us cleared a single thing. The band picked up after themselves and thanked us for being there. Loretta insisted we sit with her and Conway. I didn't gush, but it was obvious that I knew her music through and through. She smiled and talked old country music with me for a half hour. Conway joined in and was amazing. The depth of their knowledge of some really obscure music was astounding. And yes, Conway's hair was black and weirdly solid. Loretta was a tiny woman, not just short, but delicate. She was terminally sweet, and her voice carried beautifully. I'll never forget it. Story 24. No real rude encounters, but some positive ones. I live in central Kentucky, and there are Steve Zahn sightings all the time. He goes to parades and other public events around Lexington, and he's pretty chill. No one really bothers him. We just say hello to him like he's everyone's friend. I saw Jennifer Coolidge on a plane train thing in Atlanta airport once. Just smiled and nodded at her, and she gave me a little smile back. I left her alone. She's so funny and talented, I wouldn't even know what to say. Bill Clinton was very nice. I met him in Beijing in 2003. I was there for a conference as a graduate student and hanging out with a former classmate who had moved to China for work. We were in an antique market area of town, Luoyucheng for those who know, and all of a sudden a big group of very large, very serious-looking Chinese guys with crew cuts start coming down the street, gently moving all the pedestrians to the side. Obviously plainclothes, cops/security/military. We got boxed into a doorway and all of a sudden we see Bubba pointing at things and chatting with his guide/handler. I took a few quick photos, then shouted, "Mr. President!" as loud as I could. He spun around and saw us. We were the only other white people on the street, so we weren't hard to find. He worked his way through the big security guys and came right up to us, shook our hands, asked us where we were from, and then said, "I'm so glad to meet you. I'm really happy you're here." Then kept cruising down the street window shopping. It was surreal. Story 25. Will Smith. Total a-hole. Pulled the "do you know who I am" BS on me when he was still a nobody. Called me filthy names and trashed a hotel room. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. Lisa Rinna's mother. Again, pulled the "do you know who I am" BS. I didn't even know who the hell her daughter was at the time. We're from the same small town in Oregon, but she's 4 to 5 years older than I am. Her mother is an insufferable C-word. My first husband went to high school with LR and says she isn't any better. He showed me her yearbook picture and she has been unrecognizable as that person for probably 20 years. On the nice side, Patrick Duffy. He bought a beautiful home in my area and came into the local furniture store I worked at. Sold him a house full of furniture. He came back to see me when he built an ADU on the property for more furniture. Several years later, I'm working at another retail store right next to a Trader Joe's. He pulls into a head-end parking space right in front of my store. He sees me through the window and waves. Then he proceeds to come in to say hi. Not only did he remember me, he asked after my kids and my mom, who I had been taking care of through her cancer diagnosis when I'd sold him furniture. He's truly one of the kindest humans I've ever met. Willie Nelson played an outdoor venue very nearby a bar/restaurant I was managing. He and his band showed up after the show was over. He sits down at my bar, lights up a joint, this was 1994, so not legal, and asks if I'm one of those women that wants my boobs signed. I declined and he said, "Thank God, I'm tired of that," and proceeded to hang out till we closed. He was super kind, very funny, and his band was awesome, and he tipped huge. I did get an autograph, just not on my tits. Don't need or want an argument about this one, but the entire Clinton family, President, Hillary, and Chelsea, I've met them several times. They will remember past conversations, insignificant things about you, and will never forget you. They're one of the kindest, loveliest families I've ever met. Every time I met with one of them, I felt like they were truly engaged. 10 out of 10 recommend meeting one or all. John Ritter. My friends and I spotted him in a park nearby our local Shakespeare Festival grounds. He was being stalked by this group of middle-aged women. We could tell he had no clue how to get away, and as he wandered into the park quite far from the trail he took to get in, we motioned to him and he could see that we could see what was going on. We signaled to him to follow, and he did. We got him away from these hormonal cougars and back onto the trail he needed to get back to the festival grounds. He thanked us profusely and told us he had engaged with them, and then they wouldn't leave him alone. He was very grateful to us and asked if we wanted an autograph. Not one of us had a pen, and this was in the 80s, so no cell phones for selfies. He was the nicest guy. I grew up in an area of Oregon that straddles I-5, and we attracted a lot of famous people, so you never knew who you might run into. I've had a few more sightings and meetings than this, but these were the first that come to mind. Story 26. I worked in the cafeteria that fed the Buffalo Bills during training camp in 1992 to 1993, during their 4 Super Bowl run. Most of them were pretty nice, despite being banned from local bars for being a little rowdy with the local college girls. Far and away, the most contemptible piece of crap to ever don a Bills uniform, and I do realize that includes O.J. Simpson, was quarterback Jim Kelly. He threw such a fit about wanting to swim laps without being bothered that they had to kick out all the kids from the summer program for underprivileged youth so he could swim alone. I ran into him at a convenience store where he and a couple teammates were buying beer. A handful of 10 to 12-year-old kids recognized him and waited outside to talk to him and maybe get an autograph. On the way out, he just interrupted the request, shouting, "No!" and tossed his change and wadded up receipt at them as he brushed by them. He was a well-known cheater, relentlessly pursuing one of my girlfriend's coworkers, among others. He's been an arrogant, nasty blowhard to everyone I know who's encountered him. I was suspended from that cafeteria job for a week after finally losing my cool in front of a dozen players and coaching staff. I said a little too loudly, "F him, who the F does he think he is? I have as many Super Bowl rings as he does." I understand that he's changed somewhat since then. He's done great charity work since the tragic death of his son and his cancer diagnosis, but man, it's difficult to stifle a string of obscenities every time he gets interviewed. Nicest? I've had multiple encounters with Henry Rollins. He's always been nice and very engaging. I was in Tony Little's orbit for a few years. He was always nice, thoughtful, much smarter than you might expect, and not anywhere near as spazzy as he appears on TV. I worked in TV news for a while, and Chuck Schumer was always really nice, although maybe due to my being in the press. He always remembered my name and made a point of asking about my dog's health every time I saw him for about a year after overhearing me telling my boss I'd be in late due to a semi-urgent vet visit. I waited on Phil Donahue and Marlo Thomas every morning for a week when they were in town for something. They were very friendly and didn't at all act like big shots. Phil would plow through a foot-thick stack of newspapers every morning and tip me an extra $100 at the end of the week for recycling them for him when he was done. Story 27. I worked for a large West Coast promoter and management company in the 90s. Most folks on the talent side were actually nice people. Maybe it's a music thing, not sure. But the day-to-day touring, travel, lack of sleep, etc., and you quickly find out who the dicks are. The guys from Alice in Chains were such nice dudes, particularly to road staff. We all knew that Lane was constantly battling substance abuse, but the dude was so damn nice to everyone around him. His passing still makes me so effing sad. Tom Morello, on the other hand, seemed like a bit of a dick. It's like a switch that he'd flip. One minute he's in front of a microphone praising the common man and his plights with evil corporate fascists. And the next minute, he'd be rude as F to the poor union guy who's unloading and packing mountains of gear at minimum union wage. These guys/gals would arrive at midnight, work for 12 to 14 straight hours to make sure sound check can go off without a hitch. Then it's a marathon sprint to ensure that the show is ready by 8 p.m. 3 to 4 hour break for show, and then the breakdown and packing of gear on the truck starts. It's a grind. How hard is it to be nice to these poor bastards? Meh, I've heard similar stories about him and restaurant staff, so it doesn't surprise me. Side note, the boys from Rush are the sweetest dudes you could meet. I never partook, always afraid a boss would fire me, but Alex Lifeson once asked me and a coworker if we'd like to hit from a massive joint one night in Oakland, California. My only regret in life was not taking him up on his offer. Story 28. I've worked with a ton of celebs, but honestly, I think I've gotten really lucky because I have far more positive interactions than negative ones. Worst? John Voight, just an absolute grumpy dick of a human being. Can't be bothered with anything. I only had to work with him for one day, but it was enough for me. Some positive ones. Sean Astin is a effing gem of a human being. He's polite and professional and just a nicer guy than even you can imagine him to be. John Farveau was also super nice. You could talk to him literally at any time about almost anything. Very early in my career, I worked as a PA for Tom Arnold, and he was hilarious and said I was, quote, the best PA he's ever seen. He was always in his trailer recording comedy. I don't know what it was for, though. Brad Pitt was chill, too. He literally learned everyone's name on set, too. Robert Downey Jr. was exactly what you'd expect. It was 100 degrees out, and he was still in a leather jacket, double-fisting some Starbucks with his shades on inside. Kiefer Sutherland wasn't what I expected. That man has the heart of a rock star, but he was also nice and approachable. But I always felt he would be fun to go out drinking with. Elliot Gould was hilarious. I told him on set that my mom was a huge fan, and he asked why I wasn't, and then he demanded that we call her immediately, and they had a 10-minute chat. Made my mom's life. She told me to get Richard Gere to call her one day. Story 29. Let's see. Diana Ross didn't want us looking at her on the way to the stage, which presented a problem because we were her bodyguards. I had to hide behind a door. Sammy Davis Jr.'s wife left a bag containing several $100,000 worth of jewelry in a plant in the lobby of the hotel. Staff found it, returned it to him and her, and they didn't even say thank you. Joan Rivers was really sweet, and I was often her room bodyguard, which meant I stood outside of her door and made sure that anyone trying to go in was authorized, including staff. Her dog, however, Spike, who went everywhere with her, barked like he was a mastiff who was going to tear you apart, although he was only about the size of a football. Her daughter Melissa is also very sweet, as was Joan's husband, Edgar. He would often come out of their suite and talk to me. I was absolutely stunned and sad when he committed self-unaliving. Liberace was amazing, and I always wanted to be his bodyguard, so I could stand and listen to him play during rehearsals and shows. His boyfriend, on the other hand, however, was really arrogant. Red Skelton and his wife were two of the sweetest people I've ever met. He came out of his dressing room after the show and stood there for almost 20 minutes telling jokes while he drank 4 Heinekens. He had Heineken after every show because he said that they were the only beer that replaced the potassium that he lost while performing on stage. Julio Iglesias was exactly as charming and wonderful as you would think he was. He often traveled with his daughter, and I was assigned as the room guard. And the instructions that he would give me about who to let in showed how much he cared about her. He also kissed me every time I saw him, which was awkward, but he was so natural about it that I let him. Barack and Michelle Obama are absolutely wonderful people. Bill Clinton is the most magnetic man I've ever met in my life. There's just something about him that everyone around him seems to find instantly attractive. It's like charm to the millionth power. The guys in the bands Bad Company and the Outlaws. The first night out of the concert, my friends and I were invited backstage. We talked to the guys in the bands and just really hit it off, and they invited us to come to the hotel next day for dinner and a swim. They had a rare day off in between. I think there was a game at the venue or something. We went, and I played poker with a bunch of them and other people until the wee hours of the morning. No one was inappropriate. They mainly just talked about their families and how much they missed them. We went to the concert the next night, where my purse got stolen. It had my keys in it. I didn't expect to see anybody in the band again because they had to break down, but I managed to get the attention of manager of Bad Company, Gene, who I had talked to a lot over the past several days. I explained what happened, and he told us to sit tight and he would help. He let us ride on the band bus back to the hotel, where I called my mom, and we waited in his room until she was able to come pick us up and take me back to my car. Really cool. I could probably remember others if I tried, but overall, they were very nice. The nice ones definitely outweigh the nasty ones. Story 30. Oh boy, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this story somewhere before, but here I go doing it again. It's long. My dad used to do electrical stuff, mostly lighting for celeb TV shows and such, and since we were kids, he had to drag us along with him on the weekends he had us. Most of them were minor celebs I can't even remember the name of, or tribute bands doing a gig at a small hall. But one of them was a job for Bruce Forsyth for some show he was going to be doing. It was me and my brother. I was about 10 at the time. My job was to just keep out of the way and keep my brother occupied in the corner whilst they did their stuff. We were literally only there because my dad is cheap and wouldn't pay someone to watch us. The first thing Bruce did when entering the place was complain. He complained about how slow everything was, how cold it was. He complained about how there were no amenities for him. He wasn't meant to be there. And he kept trying to boss everyone around as if he knew all their jobs. My dad was the lead on the work, and he didn't take too kindly to this guy who thought he knew everything, coming around and telling his men what to do. So he told Bruce to leave them to their work. They have their tasks, and it'll be done faster if they're just left to it. Bruce Forsyth clearly didn't get told no enough as a child, because he got even more moody after that. Like I said before, he wasn't meant to be there. He wasn't due to be there until filming started, which was I don't know when. That's why me and my brother had been allowed to come along, because the celebs weren't going to be around. A couple of hours in, Bruce then started demanding things were changed. At one point, he demanded the entire backdrop was changed and had to be talked down by a meek stagehand who had obviously lost a bet. He continued to complain about the pace, and then he started telling my dad's crew what to do again. My dad told him to take a hike, and if he meddled with their work one more time, they were all going to leave. Bruce didn't listen, and an hour later, he was shouting at them to do it some other way, calling them all sorts of names and words that as a kid, I knew I wasn't allowed to say. So my dad told him again to basically bugger off, and Bruce became argumentative with him, getting in his face, calling him stuff, etc. So my dad made everyone put their tools down, gathered me and my brother up, and told him that we're all going to the pub across the road, and if Bruce wanted them to finish the job, he could come and apologize. Then, whilst he was shouting and hollering at us all, we walked out. I remember my dad giving me and my brother the small talk of, quote, "Don't repeat any of the words he said, they're bad words," as we left. I don't know how long we were in that pub. I just remember having free reign over the food menu and my dad's friends being really nice and funny. Several assistants came by to apologize on his behalf, but my dad refused to accept them and said that he wanted Mr. Forsyth himself to come and say sorry. He did buy the assistants a drink, and some of them even joined us for food. In the end, he was told by some higher up that Bruce had left, and they practically begged him to come back and finish the work. So he relented, and the job was completed in a timely manner. Everyone got a bonus as an apology as well. Edit. I saw people adding their best as well, so I thought I'd add mine. Sophie Aldred, Ace from the old Doctor Who, is generally a nice person and really sweet. I've met some of the Critical Role cast, and they were all nice people as well. Taliesin especially. I'm very socially anxious and not a good talker, and he had me talking for ages. He was so nice. Craig Charles was nice when I met him too, though I'd heard mixed reactions. Story 31. Worst? Giancarlo Esposito. I've met a lot of celebs over the years as I used to frequent conventions quite a bit. Giancarlo was the only bad experience I've ever had. My friend and I were at a convention here in Dallas and caught him at a moment when there was no one at his autograph table, so we decided to stop by and purchase an autograph. I tend to ramble a little when I'm nervous, which I was, and I was going on and on about how great he was in Breaking Bad as he signed my photo. He didn't say a word, and once I stopped talking, he looked at me with a stone-cold expression and said flatly, "Are you done?" I was mortified and quickly left his table, feeling completely dejected. Best encounter? Billy Boyd. I'm a massive Lord of the Rings fan and met him at another convention. My friend and I had already gotten our photo op and autographs from him earlier that day. Both great experiences, but as we were about to leave at the end of the day, we walked by his autograph table, where he was just sitting and chatting with his handler, no one in line. He made eye contact with us and waved, so we decided to go over and say hello and thank him for the autograph and photo. We ended up chatting with him for about half an hour. He even let me sit in an empty chair next to him behind the table. At one point, he looked at his phone and saw he had a voicemail. "Oh, Dom called me. Let's see what he wants," he said, referring to Dominic Monaghan, Lord of the Rings co-star and bestie. He put his phone on speaker and played the message, which was just Dom yelling something along the lines of, "Say hello to all the sexy people at the convention for me." I was completely floored when Billy handed me his phone and said we should call Dom back. We ended up talking very quickly to him, but he was someplace very loud and it was hard to understand what he was saying. I was trying to keep my crap together after that phone call, so we thanked Billy again, got big hugs from him, and we began to make our way to the car to go home. I was in complete shock at what had just happened, thinking how we had absolutely no idea how happy he just made us. This was like 10 years ago, and I still look back at it as one of my best memories, still unable to believe it actually happened. Story 32. Madonna. I worked at a boutique luxury retail store about 12 years ago. It was a place where many celebrities shopped because the inventory was cool and the staff/clientele were very low-key. I met everyone from Paul McCartney, Gwen Stefani, Victoria and David Beckham, Steven Tyler, Goldie Hawn, famous artists and architects, etc. The point is, we were used to people of all levels of fame coming in and treating everyone with the same level of service. And the store worked on group commission, like many similar shops. Madonna comes in one day and she shops for hours. The store was 7 floors, so there was a lot to see, and one of our personal shoppers took her around and showed her everything, pulled her sizes from stock, helped her try things on, organized her dressing rooms. I managed one of the floors. When she came to my floor, one of my staff members, who had been working at the store the longest out of anyone, came up to her and very politely expressed how much her music had meant to him growing up as a gay man in a communist country in the 80s. From my point of view, it wasn't inappropriate or unprofessional, just really heartfelt, I'm a fan acknowledgement. She rolled her eyes and turned away from him in disgust. After she left our floor, he cried. She shopped a little more, then purchased nothing, after trying on tons and tons of clothes and wasting everyone's time. But if that's not enough to make her the rudest, we got a call the following day from one of the most expensive brands we carried, like 5-digit pieces, saying that everything Madonna liked, we were to send to her, for free. Story 33. Rudest Bobby Hull, former NHLer that played for Chicago, and my dad grew up watching him. When I was like 6 or 7, he did a meet and greet at a bar where we lived, and my dad wanted to take me to meet him. He called ahead and got permission from the bar to let me inside as long as we arrived before they started serving at 11 a.m. We got there right at the start and met Bobby, and he was already visibly drunk. This was at like 9 or 10 a.m., and barely said a word to me. He took a picture with us, and my dad asked him a couple questions that really got short answers while Bobby was looking right through him and making comments about the waitresses showing up for work. I didn't care much because I really had no idea who this guy was, but he was one of my dad's heroes growing up, and I always felt bad for him that he met the guy and he turned out to be a piece of crap. Turns out he always was, but back then, this was the early 90s, not many of the stories about him had come out yet. Nicest? Dennis Haskins, aka Mr. Belding. I went to LA for a training class, and myself and a few others went out to a bar near a hotel that happened to be a karaoke bar. We got a table and ordered drinks, and I went to the bathroom, but as I was walking there, I noticed him at the bar and we made eye contact. Before I could say anything, he waved me over and shook my hand and said, quote, "Hi, I'm Dennis. What's your name?" I told him, and he said he was pleased to meet me, and we chatted for like half an hour. He found out I was from Toronto and introduced me to the bartender, who was also the owner because he was also from Toronto. He bought me a shot of tequila and we got a photo together, and it was just the best time. He was the sweetest man. When we were done chatting, 2 girls in their 20s also recognized him, and he looks at me and says, "Sorry, Bill, I gotta take this," and starts chatting them up. A few minutes later, they were on stage with him while he sang That's Life by Frank Sinatra. One of the best nights of my life, and all thanks to him. Story 34. I bartended at a restaurant. Ashton Kutcher sat at my bar and brought along the drink he ordered at the other bar while waiting for a seat. The hostess who seated him had advised me of what he and his companion were drinking so that I could seamlessly serve them a second round. A Prosecco for the lady and a gin and tonic for the gentleman. This was standard practice for any guest being seated with drinks in hand. When it came time for another round, I asked, "Sir, may I get you another gin and tonic?" But I had apparently been misinformed because it was a vodka tonic, and Kutcher looked at me with daggers in his eyes. "Vodka tonic," he demanded dismissively, as though it were a personal attack to misidentify his spirit. They left after a while, without a single pleasantry, and left a below-average tip. But Sammy Hager was cool as hell. Gracious, complimentary of the food and drink, and tipped well. 10 out of 10. Story 35. John Goodman came to my dad's neighborhood to visit with his cousin, got drunk, and then made a scene screaming at the neighborhood children for making too much noise and ruining his evening. It all happened so fast and was so unexpected that it wasn't like there was anyone recording or anything. Anytime I've tried to talk about it in detail on Reddit before, it gets downvoted to hell. I guess people just really don't like the idea that someone with so much public goodwill could ever have too much to drink, be in a bad mood, and go off on some kids just like any other dude with a big personality and a lot of clout might. Edit. Since I'm not being downvoted into oblivion this time, I want to add a detail that's always been weird about this to me. I don't think Goodman even has family in my state. I have no idea if he even has any cousins. I tried to look it up before, see if there was a family tree posted, and AFAIK, he doesn't even have any aunts or uncles, because besides also being a white guy, the neighbor bore no real resemblance to him, and I kept getting the sense that he was using the term cousin more to describe their relationship rather than their relation, if that makes sense. Neighborhood is a cheap little, not quite podunk of little cookie-cutter, one-story houses. Think cheap vinyl sliding, potholes and cracked asphalt, American flags on more lawns and porches than not, NRA bumper stickers on dinged-up work trucks, the works. But the neighbor had invited me in exactly once when he saw me carrying a guitar case, and he showed me a home studio and instrument collection that was worth easily 6 digits. Besides the exterior looking exactly as cheap as all the other houses in the area, the interior was extremely well furnished and very, very nice. Dink transplant couple from I'm not sure where, and they were both always kind of a mystery to everyone else, just generally not fitting in and mostly keeping to themselves. The noise level of the children was typical to what you'd experience in any area where there's kids roaming around outside in the summer. Occasional distant shouting or laughter, but nothing outrageous or prolonged. Story 36. God, that takes some thinking. There were many. I was the airport manager in an international airport and met many celebs who were incredible jerks. Gene Simmons, monumental a-hole. He was traveling with Shannon and their kids, who were little at the time. She kept saying, "Jeannie, chill," and Jeannie did not. Really foul language, stomping around, throwing crap. Ryan O'Neal and Farrah Fawcett, flying back to LA after he was shooting a film. Both drunk, both arguing, with each other, with airline employees, and with other passengers. He was especially nasty. Bill Shatner, really full of himself, came in my office demanding to speak to me. My receptionist was very excited and came to get me. When I arrived, he asked if I was the boss. When I said I was, he spun on his heel and said, "Unlock the lounge." The airport authority maintains a distinguished visitors lounge, and started to walk away. He realized pretty quickly I wasn't following him and turned around. "Hurry up." I do not play well with people like that. My job was a very stressful, high-pressure one. Lots of negatives, but I loved the one huge positive. I had no obligation to put up with nonsense like that. I said no and turned to go back to my office. He completely lost his crap. "Where are you going? I want the lounge open right now. Do you know who I am?" The last one is my favorite. I said I knew precisely who he was, and when he became a distinguished visitor, I would be happy to help him out. Then I went back to my office. We eventually had to have the airport police come up to the office to calm him down. Jack Nicholson. He's crazy. Really nasty mouth. Sleazebag. So it's safe to say that Bill Shatner might be full of shat? Sorry, bad dad joke. It's early. Let's move on. Story 37. I met Lou Gramm, former singer of the band Foreigner. I was hired, along with a buddy, to be the DJ for an arena football team. It was brand new to the Rochester area, and this was the opening night. We got there, set everything up, and the owner team handed us $500 and said, "We're all square for the season." We had agreed on $5,000 for the season, so after some arguing, it became clear this dude was a cheapskate who wasn't going to budge. We had everything set up already and basically said, "We'll work tonight, but find someone else for the rest of the season." Lou Gramm was there to sing the national anthem. I walked over to him, said, "Hi Lou, nice to meet you. I'll be cueing the track for the anthem. Let me know if I can help in any way." He said, "Look kid, I don't want to hear any Foreigner tonight. Don't play it." I repeated, "Okay, so the track for the anthem?" And he walked away. I, being stiffed out of $4,500, was already annoyed and didn't like that at all. So we play the anthem, and it's my job now to play music before kickoff/in-between plays. Stuff like that. Every single break in the play, we played Jukebox Hero. It's a small arena. I can see him fuming. We keep doing it. It's the only song we played that night. We made it to halftime before he came over and yelled at me in ways no other human has ever yelled at me. Called me every name in the book. Was red-faced livid. I just smiled and said nothing, which only pissed him off more. The entire time, Jukebox Hero is playing throughout the arena. He eventually stormed off and I packed up my gear, knowing damn well the owner was probably going to throw me out before the end of halftime. I'll take some blame, but he did not need to be such an a-hole. Story 38. I will always tell anyone about how horrible Alex Guarnaschelli is. We worked with her on a Super Bowl party that was held by a very rich person. We were told to not go into our prep area at all, which is where we had storage lockers for our bags, and also where our manager's office was. She didn't care. We weren't to look her in the eye or speak to her. I went to ask my manager a question, as this was a large event, and she yelled, "What do you want? Leave!" When we all gathered around to hear what we'd be serving, she was so patronizing and even asked us if we knew what mustard was. Like, WTF. The worst part? Her food was from the frozen section and tasted like crap. She was only hired because she was a celebrity chef. This party also had Kevin Hart, surrounded by his entourage, who were all at least a foot taller than him. But him and his fiancée, at the time, were very nice and professional. He did a good show, even if the host and his wife were the only ones that liked his humor. He spoke about how this was definitely not his normal crowd. They also had Justin William there for Magic Show, and he didn't get to perform, so once the party left for the game, he performed for the whole staff and was honestly the nicest guy ever. I think he was just happy to hang out and do his show for someone. I'll never forget him being the bright light after being so looked down upon by Alex. F her. Story 39. 10 years after my mom died, I got a call from my sister asking if I'd ever read Mom's journal. I told her that sometimes when I was growing up, I'd go into the master bedroom at night and crawl up on the bed and watch TV with Mom, and sometimes she'd be writing in her journal, but I never sat down and read through it. My sister sighed and said I needed to read at least part of it, which enraged me when I did and made me wish Isaac Asimov and Harlan Ellison got crushed by the same bus. My mom was an editor for one of the biggest research firms in the country, but she had also worked as a librarian before that, so somehow that all came together and she ended up on a panel at a book convention in DC. She was excited and even got a nice dress. She had gotten a knee replacement about 10 months before and was still using a cane occasionally, and with the concrete floor of the convention hall, she took it with her. She got on an elevator and two men got on with her, Isaac Asimov and Harlan Ellison. Asimov gave her, as she called it, the 10-second look, which was him looking her up and down while pursing his lips. Ellison asks her what she's doing at the convention, as they don't recognize her as a writer, and she says she works as an editor for a research firm. And then Ellison interrupts her and barks out belligerently, "What the F is this research firm crap? You're an editor there, and you got to come to this? To do what? There's no pole dancing here." And he grabbed her cane, and Asimov was suddenly running his hand across her chest. She managed to grab the cane back and kind of thrust it at them while screaming. The elevator door opened, but there was no one waiting. But Asimov and Ellison both scuttled out, with Ellison saying in a leering tone, "Have a nice day, Toots." Mom understandably was extremely shaken, but said, "Screw it, they don't get to beat me," and was there doing the panel, and then she sees Asimov and Ellison out in the crowd, both of them watching her. Asimov keeps rubbing and running his hand across his chest, and Ellison was making kissy faces at her. She deliberately turned away from them and focused on the rest of the panel, and when she came home, tore the dress off and burned it in our outdoor grill. I never knew about what had happened at the convention with those two crap sacks or the dress until I read those entries in her journal. Even before, I thought Ellison was a belligerent egomaniac who thought he was the smartest person on the planet and who had issues with women, seeing as he'd been married like 4 times. Story 40. Elon Musk. He stayed at a mountain resort that I worked at in 2018. He was luckily only there for 3 days, but he was an utter terror the entire time he was there. He refused to be checked in at the reception area and demanded a private check-in at his cabin, which is fine, but we ask ahead of time so that we can staff properly for the later arrivals. He asked for the youngest female concierge on staff to be sent to the check-in with nobody else for security reasons. I took the check-in myself instead of sending the 19-year-old and took the largest and oldest driver I could find for security reasons. He wanted the personal cell phone numbers of all female concierge staff. I said that is against our policy and set him up with the resort app so he could contact whoever was on duty for a prompt answer. He harassed every single female employee so nastily that by the time he had been there for 12 hours, every department switched him to only male staff. He didn't tip any of the wait staff or guides for any activities. He booked a private horseback ride that a wrangler was brought in specifically for the day, and then refused to go because he didn't like the colors of any of the horses available. And he wanted to ride a really butch and muscular horse. He meant a draft horse, which we had for pulling wagons, but none for riding. He also had insane demands. He wanted an 80-year-old beautiful ponderosa pine cut down because he didn't like how the light hit it at sunset. He wanted shock collars put on the squirrels to stop them from being too loud. And he wanted us to trap a grizzly bear and bring it to his cabin for a few hours so he could take pictures and study it. He was the rudest, stupidest, and most arrogant POS I've ever encountered. Story 41. So I don't have a rude one, but in like 3rd grade, so I would have been around 9, Wayne Gretzky was doing a book signing for his autobiography to come out when he was in town playing the Red Wings on a night game. The signing was like 3 p.m. or something. I was a massive hockey fan at the time, and Gretzky was by far and away my favorite player, who didn't play for the Wings. My dad takes me up there after school, and we get the book, and there's just a massive line out of the bookstore, and he's only there till like 4:30 or something like that. And we end up getting in the building, and then they called it that they had to leave, because I get it, he had a game to get to that night. He starts making his way toward the exit, and obviously there's a pretty big crowd, and security is working him through it. I'm a little kid, and I'm standing there with my book held up, maybe 10 feet from the door. He happened to look up as he was walking by, with his security through the crowd, sees me, stops his security, and stops walking. Sign my book before moving on. That stuck with me. I can still visually picture every second of the event like a movie, and even what he looked like and the suit that he had on. I thought that was a pretty good example of how an athlete or celebrity should behave. I get that you only have limited time to do something, but he noticed that I was a kid, and he stopped, and he made my day, and I'll always, always remember it. Story 42. For me, Katy Perry totally ruined my view of her. I worked as a PA for the NFL Honors Show several years back. I was assigned to the green room because I had no problem being friendly with celebs and not get starstruck. I had a few interactions with Tim Tebow and Rich Eisen that proved this to my boss. Both are very cool and friendly guys. Part of my job was to greet celebrities at the VIP entrance if they didn't want to walk the red carpet, call their assigned handler, and keep them happy until the handler showed up a minute or two later. Most celebs were friendly, normal. Joel McHale gave me a good game tap on the ass as he left because we were talking about me being a college football player. He was fun, but Katie came in and literally threw her assistant at me. Most celebs were on their own or with an SO. She had an entourage. She would not look at anyone who tried to address her and would literally keep a wall of people around her that she would throw like Pokeballs whenever she encountered a stranger. That was the part that bothered me the most, how she treated her staff. She also left as soon as her bit was done. Most of the celebs hung out and drank and socialized, and was just as much an ice queen then as well. The best celebs I met that night included Chris Evans and John Hamm, who were both drunk and joking at the bar, causing Chris Evans to stumble into me. This was right after the first Captain America came out, so this was awesome. Rex Ryan, who talked with me about football and life and just had the greatest dad energy of anyone that night. I'd hang out with him again in a heartbeat. Rich Eisen, who not only talked to me about my dream of being a sportscaster and how I could achieve that, but also made a point to introduce me to Peanut Tillman because I mentioned he was one of my favorite players growing up. This was the only moment where I felt like I was starstruck. Story 43. Christopher Reeve, Superman, threw a clothes hanger at me once. I was set crew on a play that Gwyneth Paltrow was in with her mother. She was only 20 and a complete nobody, and had only gotten the role because her mom was famous, but she acted like she was the hottest thing to ever hit a stage. She was the same age as all of us interns, but treated us like the help. Same summer, I was 18 and doing summer stock theater in Massachusetts. I met a bunch of celebrities who were very nice. Mary Tyler Moore and Hal Holbrook were in a play together, and every night after their show, when they had to have been exhausted, they came out to see the interns during our ratty little cabaret show at midnight. Every night. Anthony Edwards, Goose from Top Gun and Dr. Green from ER, would join in the interns' games of Water Gun Assassin. Terrible shot. I assassinated him on 2 different occasions, lol. He also threw himself a birthday party and invited all the interns. Betty Buckley won the Tony for playing the original Grisabella in Cats. Always took the time to give the interns all kinds of advice, and even offered free voice lessons when she had time. She's also an old family friend of my family, so I was a little bit of a rock star that summer for knowing her, lol. Story 44. This was not a personal experience with meeting a celebrity. I'm from Indiana and do not get the opportunity to very often, but this is an experience that my family members had. So my mother is a psychic medium. She's big into anything spiritual or paranormal. In Indianapolis, we have a historically haunted district that has a dark past, Irvington. My mother helps facilitate tours every year for the local Halloween event that happens in Irvington. She's part of a community of local paranormal investigators. My brother and I have been fans of watching Ghost Adventures on the Discovery Channel for many years. It's not because we share our mother's passion for paranormal. It's because the show seems satirical to us and we enjoy laughing while watching it. My brother even watched it with his firstborn son on occasion. My nephew got to the point where he also enjoyed watching the show. He called it Green People Walking, because the show is shot mostly in night vision and makes them appear green. The Ghost Adventures crew ended up doing a segment on H.H. Holmes, who was one of the nation's first documented serial killers who happened to spend some time living in Indianapolis, Irvington. The producers of the show reached out to the local community of investigators to see if they'd be interested in being on the show. They typically have locals tell their stories about paranormal events before conducting their own investigation. My mother was beyond excited for the opportunity. She legitimately enjoyed the show and everything it was about. When the time came to film the show, my mother brought my nephew with her in hopes that he would get to meet the crew. Everyone from the show was very kind and cordial except one person. Zach Bagans, the face of the show and the main investigator. If you've never watched the show, this guy is either a tool or a very convincing actor who's just portraying a tool. He's always donned in Ed Hardy clothes, spiked up, gelled hair, lots of rings and necklaces, and even speaks like a tool. He's gotten in fights with his own crew, claiming he was actually being possessed, and even has tried to fight the ghost. He calls it provocation. He even comes off as a creep sometimes who hits on the younger or more attractive locals when doing his interviews. After filming was completed, my mother asked if my nephew could meet Zach and get his autograph. I don't understand how a celebrity can deny a young child the opportunity to meet someone who seems so cool in their eyes. Needless to say, he did not meet or even give my nephew an autograph. Not only that, my mother says he was very rude about it. Story 45. I worked at a local comedy club. Here's my experiences with 3 comedians I met. Only one of them was rude, but I love telling these stories. Pauly Shore. There isn't much to say here. I said hi to him and he completely ignored me. I didn't try to talk to him again for the rest of the weekend. He did not look happy the entire time. He seemed miserable, but put on a happy face for his fans. Tony Rock. He was there during the first weekend I was off of training. Sunday evening, he invited me into the green room with him and shut the door. He said, "I saw you taking care of my friends all weekend. I didn't hear any of them thank you, and I didn't see any of them tip you. I just wanted to let you know that it didn't go unnoticed." And he handed me $100. Kevin Nealon. He's my favorite. I watched a bit of his stand-up before he came. In one video, he had a running joke of, "What with the economy and all?" So when I first saw him, I said, "Hi Kevin, it's so nice to meet you, what with the economy and all." He loved it. He laughed and asked for my name. Each day, he would ask me how I was doing and chat for a minute. Such a nice guy. Also, it's kind of funny because he's totally sober. He doesn't smoke or drink or anything. Just funny because of his roles in Weeds and Grandma's Boy, lol. Fantastic human. Story 46. I was in Austin for SXSW and went to the premiere of Chef. Being the premiere, they had actor/director Jon Favreau there as well as a few of the other actors. They did a little panel interview after the movie and then announced that they would be having an after party at a local bar with a concert by Leon Bridges, Austin native and in the movie. So I go to the party and it's packed like sardines. My coworkers and I squeezed through and waited forever for a beer. We were in a spot where we couldn't even see the stage or anything. We could hear Favreau and others talking and then the concert started. It was a miserable experience, so we just decided to leave. I squeezed through the crowd towards the front door and basically was ejected out by pressure, and I slammed into someone outside. It was Jon Favreau. Apparently, after talking on stage and introducing Leon, they took them through a back door and around the outside to get a different door for a VIP area. They had a food truck there serving some food from the movie, and they had stopped to grab a bite. There was basically no one out front other than Jon Favreau and Jimmy Kimmel, and a few others in their group. Favreau was so kind, even though I slammed into him. I told him I loved the movie, and he was grateful, and I probably said a few other small talk things, and asked for a picture with him, and he obliged. Then I started chatting with Kimmel, mentioning that I knew he was in town doing his show as part of SXSW, and basically said, "What's the process for getting tickets?" He mentioned there was some number to call or whatever, and then he said, "You know what? How many people are in your group?" I told him 3, and he got out his wallet and reached in and gave me 3 tickets for the recording of his show that week. All were super cool and nice. I thanked them all a million times, and as we started walking away, John Leguizamo was walking towards them. I said, "Great job in the movie," and he dapped me up. My coworkers were just standing there awkwardly the whole time. I guess they were starstruck. I spent a couple seasons working for NFL teams and met lots of famous players, coaches, celebs, etc. I mean, I ate lunch at a table next to Ray Lewis and Terrell Suggs every day and was basically educated to treat them like coworkers. So I just was used to treating and talking to famous people pretty much like you would anyone else, which is always my advice to others. Story 47. Jason Mraz, hands down. Let me preface this with, I come from a music industry family. If you look in my post history, you'll see photos of my mom with various actors and musicians. I grew up in a house with gold and platinum records with my mother's name on them from working with artists like Whitney Houston and 38 Special. My father was a roadie or a band-aid for The Who and Tears for Fear. I started doing lights and sound in high school after being trained and continued to work in various ways in the music industry at venues until I changed paths. So I've been around these types of folks my entire life. Without a shadow of a doubt, Jason Mraz was the rudest celeb by far without question. Before the gates opened, I remember him running around the venue to warm up. No biggie. That's not entirely atypical. What was atypical was his team, literally, going around and threatening staff to, quote, not even look at Mr. Mraz. All staff were instructed to turn backwards and away from him when he came around. Such a difference to other artists who would go around and even thank the food workers. My mother would say Patti Smith. Even to her death, my mother swore up and down that Patti Smith was the, by and far, worst person she worked with. Story 48. Rudest? Cole Sprouse and Lily Reinhart when they were both on Riverdale/dating. Not to me directly. I wasn't a fan of the show and stopped watching after season 1, so I had no reason to ever approach them. But we were around the same age, and I used to see them out and about when we were in Vancouver for filming. They were never pleasant when I saw them interacting with fans, but I'll never forget being out at a bar one night for my friend's birthday, and they were in an adjacent booth from where our group sat. Every time anyone tried to approach them, they were incredibly rude, looked at fans as if they were disgusting to even deign thinking about trying to talk to them in a crowded public place, and refused to engage beyond telling people to essentially F off. I get being a celebrity can be exhausting, and Cole was a child star, so he's never been able to get away from it, but the energy that night was very, we're above all of you, and it made me lose any sympathy. Nicest? Robert Carlyle. Just the nicest man ever. Served him and his family a couple times in my old retail job, and every time he was just very pleasant and kind. Totally humble and nice to engage / have a chat with. Nice kids, too. Most remarkably unremarkable, Helena Bonham Carter. Came into my work with her kids. Didn't recognize her right away without any spooky context around her. Very normal mom vibes, which I guess is the point of acting. One of her kids knocked over a display and she was super apologetic and rushed them out pretty quick. Only after hearing her voice did I do a double take and managed to choke out a starstruck, "Not a problem, have a nice day," before she was gone. Most confused, Jared Padalecki. Came into my work one day. I was working cash. My coworker was up on a ladder, taking down a heavy / awkward display, and our other coworker, Sam, was meant to be helping but got distracted reorganizing the wall further down the store. So, ladder coworker was stuck on the ladder, very aggressively screaming, "Sam! Sam! Sam!" to get our other coworker's attention moments after poor Jared walked in, and he looked really confused and mildly horrified until our coworker responded and he realized she wasn't screaming at him as if he was his character. Story 49. Back in the year 2000, Microsoft billionaire Paul Allen hired a close friend of mine, a Hollywood events producer, to throw the most amazing party for the millennium. Over 300 celebrities were flown in on private jets from all over the world to Venice for 5 days. They were provided with all sorts of amazing events, including a private concert by Santana on a gorgeous private island in a palazzo from the 1500s. The roster was A-listers, including actors and actresses, rock stars, professional athletes, politicians, and royalty. Sting, Gina Davis, Michael Keaton, Lawrence Fishburne, Quincy Jones, Penny Marshall, and so many others. I was hired as a production assistant, so here's what I want to share. From this entire group of glitterati, there was one person who stood out by far and away as the most popular and the most beloved. Robin Williams. The partygoers became like little children when they were around him. Everyone smiled in his presence. So many of the celebs wanted to hang out with him. He was gracious, generous, humble, charismatic, and just ridiculously funny. I was completely intrigued how he was the celebrity amongst his celebrity peers. We had a very tight game when it came to security guards and keeping everybody safe from outsiders, but Robin Williams needed the most security, as he was the one person who just naturally drew the most adoration and attention. I had the pleasure of spending some private time with him. He was a gem of a human being. Story 50. I've worked with a lot of famous people on a lot of different gigs, but none stands out more than 1 year at the Critics' Choice Awards. I was working as an audience coordinator, which ultimately entailed me showing celebrities to their seats, escorting them to the restrooms, and generally wrangling them, especially during / after commercial breaks. The guests were supposed to be seated by the time each commercial break ended, but every goddamn celebrity in that room kept getting up to talk to each other during the breaks and weren't making it back to their seats in time. Halfway through the show, my team and I got chastised for it and were told to be more forceful, to not be intimidated, and to tell them to sit their asses down. In polite terms, of course. Nobody was rude, but some of them were more unruly than others. Chris Evans is extraordinarily polite and courteous. I liked him a lot. I told him to please sit down and he said, "Yes, ma'am." I almost squealed. Chris Pratt is a troublemaker and doesn't care for the rules very much. Doesn't listen, kinda cocky. He was one of the worst offenders of the night and wouldn't sit down right away even when I would insist he take his seat. He just kept taking his sweet time. It was really annoying. Side note, he's also way bigger than I thought he'd be. Like, he's just bulky and wide set, like a linebacker. Patrick Stewart is a sweetheart. When I showed him to his seat, I almost said, "Your chair, Captain," but I didn't want to lose my job. Marion Cotillard is elegant and graceful. She's very, very sweet. So is Emily Blunt. She's cool as F. She has a great sense of humor. Ron Howard gets to do whatever Ron Howard wants because he's Ron Howard and a legend in any room he walks into. He would be slow to sit down, but we didn't care. He's just getting older and wasn't being disrespectful about it or anything. Kevin Costner is exactly how you think he'd be. He's very much like he is in movies. Kinda almost soft-spoken, but something about him commands respect. He just has this captivating presence that makes you lean in to hear whatever it is he's quietly murmuring. He has this air of natural authority about him. Jennifer Aniston and Angelina Jolie are the most beautiful beings I've ever laid eyes on, truly. They're just otherworldly. It's one thing to see a picture, it's another to actually see them in person. Pictures don't do any justice. Angelina is practically luminescent. The best experience of the night, though, happened when I was in the lobby of the theater waiting outside the bathrooms for Kevin Costner's wife to come back out. I was standing there kind of staring off into space when all of a sudden I felt a gentle kind of pinch on my elbow. I turned to see what it was, but there was nobody there. So I did one of those awkward double takes to find the person responsible for touching me, turning from side to side. I look over and I see Cuba Gooding Jr. He looked at me and said, "I just want to let you know, you look absolutely beautiful tonight." I was wearing a simple black dress like any theater tech, but I said thank you and smiled. Internally, I was in shambles. I was dissolved like melted butter. I've never had such intense, uncontrollable giggles in my life. I could not get over it the entire night. I still live off that crap years later, completely charmed the pants off me. I didn't have Cuba on my bingo card, never had a crush on him or anything, but now I kinda do, LMAO. Story 51. I used to work at a very high-end resort frequented by celebs, so I have several. Mind you, this resort is not in the US, so it was a bit wild to me some of these celebs thought they were that famous. Rude? Ariana Grande. A photo shoot event was happening and she made them reorganize the entire thing so that the cameras would be on her good side. Brett Favre. Weirdly entitled and rude and multiple times said, "Do you know who I am?" And I look him in the eye and I said, "No." And he said, "I'm Brett Favre." And I said, "Okay, Brett Favre, that's not on the menu." Robin Williams. This was maybe a year before his death, but he was grumpy, short, and snappy with the entire waitstaff. Didn't tip. Again, Leonardo DiCaprio didn't tip. Nicest? Will Smith. We're Spanish speaking, and he insisted he wanted to practice his Spanish. It's terrible, but he really tried. So he always asked the whole staff the basic biographic question of where are you from and what do you like? He'd remember everyone's name and see us later like, "Esteban, a ti te gusta el basketball," just to show he remembered. Weirdly, Naomi Campbell. Though she was very particular and not necessarily friendly, she had no ego at all and would happily switch tables or rooms if we needed to accommodate a large party or a wedding or something, and always tipped well. By far the best, though, was Martha Stewart. She remembered everyone's name and always tipped well. She'd chat about your life and give advice. She liked to go back in the kitchen and meet the chef and asked about recipes and would even send us pictures of her trying them back home. We all loved Martha. Story 52. He wasn't rude per se, but I got to meet Stan Lee at a con. I get it. There are 20,000 other nerds like me wanting to thank him for Spider-Man and ask him a billion questions, so I didn't intend to do that. I had a book with me, sort of a Spider-Man encyclopedia, that has this little MP3 player attached to it. You type a number that corresponds to a specific blurb in the book, and then he talks about it for 30 seconds about that specific blurb. I thought it was cool, so I wanted him to sign it. Totally aware that instead of the standard $60 signature fee, it was $80 because it wasn't a comic, it was a special item. I got to him, handed him the book, or rather his handler, who gave it to Stan, and he was just talking the entire time to someone that was on his side of the table. Never even looked up, just scribbled his name, didn't even hear me say thanks for Spider-Man, he's my hero since I was like 4 years old. I'm 47 now, by the way. Just never looked up, so I didn't actually get to meet him. I found out a couple years later that a bandmate, who I didn't know at the time, was working that con and was an assistant to him, and he said that Stan did that to nearly every person unless it was a little kid that was in a wheelchair, or an attractive girl. Ah well, they say don't meet your heroes. Story 53. Katy Perry worked at a go-kart track in Vegas years ago as a teen. Her people called up and said they had a high-profile celebrity who wanted to come in, but wanted it to themselves. We were super busy and had to piss off a bunch of paying customers by closing early, and had to issue refunds/credits on top of getting the brunt of how mad customers were. Anyhow, KP's entourage/management shows up, treats us all like complete crap before bringing your majesty in. She comes in, zero personality, not friendly at all, and is even worse than her staff with how she treated us all. Would not let us take any pictures of her even though we had a celebrity wall of photos. If I remember right, my manager was told it needed to be hush-hush that she was coming. Not sure if an NDA was involved, I didn't sign anything. Her races were all comped and we were expected to give her the royal treatment, and we did. They didn't pay anything for this either. And even crazier, she or her people didn't tip a single dollar to anyone. She wore sunglasses the entire time. It was later than 10 p.m. and indoors. Just a super douche of a person. I was never a fan of her music anyways, but it really put a bad taste in my mouth what a POS person she was. Story 54. I once ran into Jacob Hoggard, Headley lead singer, twice in 1 week. First was walking in downtown Vancouver. My friend and I were walking on the right side of the sidewalk. Hoggard was walking the opposite direction, right towards us. I didn't really notice him or recognize him. We didn't get out of the way because we were on the right side. He, not forcefully, shouldered past me while giving me this look, like he simply couldn't believe that I wouldn't get out of the way. I turned to my friend and said, "Who the F does that guy think he is?" And my friend said, "That's Jacob Hoggard. He thinks he's a rock star." Second time was about 6 days later, and we were on the West Coast Trail on Vancouver Island. There's a part of the trail where you have to take a ferry across a river, so while my group was sitting around waiting, we had lunch. I was in a group of 4. 2 guys, 2 girls. Suddenly, Hoggard shows up in a group of 6, coming in the opposite direction of us. They were very loudly talking about how they wanted to get to the next campsite early so they could start taking mushrooms, and generally about how many drugs they had packed. They literally had a dude with them they were paying to be a pack mule and carry all the heavy crap. After a while, he turned his attention to my group, and the first thing he said is, "Okay, so who's effing who here? I just want to know what my options are." We didn't respond, and he kept making loud comments about how he really needed to know this information. Just generally a loud, rude, crass, entitled a-hole. This happened just before all of his SA news broke, and when I heard about it I thought, yeah, that absolutely tracks with me. Guy was a crappy person. Story 55. I used to be a lighting tech on movies and TV and have firsthand experience working with this disgusting excuse for a human being, referring to Andy Dick. Not saying Ivanka isn't, but I've never worked with her. Worked on a small, one-day music video which featured Andy Dick as the only character. This a-hole showed up 6 hours late. I guess he was up partying all night and overslept. When he finally did show up, he was sober, or at least sober enough to pass as sober, but a couple hours in, he starts slurring his words, and then he starts getting handsy. Real handsy. He started groping anyone that got within arm's length. Gender, age, seemed totally irrelevant. I remember having a detailed conversation with the main producer about it. Basically, her pleading for the crew not to walk out, and in stumbles Andy Dick, who makes a beeline right for the producer and slaps her on the butt so hard that everyone on set audibly gasps. I was seething, but she dragged Andy Dick off behind a closed door before I could say anything. The rest of the day proceeded by keeping Andy Dick off set until we were ready to roll, and corralling his increasingly drunk ass through the shot, and having to threaten to stomp him into the ground so he would keep his hands to himself, which had dubious results. The final shot was him lying in the back of a convertible, and when they cut, they just left him there while we wrapped up the gear. He started moaning like some gut-shot dinosaur, totally incoherent. Andy Dick's assistant / childhood best friend came up to the crew members and apologized on behalf of his boss / childhood best friend, while the star is gurgling like an infant and probably pissing his pants in the back of a rented Cadillac. A totally surreal moment. But yeah, he definitely didn't face any consequences for his behavior that day. This was like 15 years ago, and I'm sure he's still pulling this crap. Story 56. Mark Cherry, creator of Desperate Housewives, was a guest mentor at a masterclass I sang in as part of a 1-week jazz intensive. I was one of maybe 5 people chosen to sing out of 40. At the time, I was 16, and the song my teacher and I had chosen was upbeat with sort of sultry lyrics. Nothing explicitly sexy, just mentions of lips / kissing. After listening to me sing it once, Mark rather derisively and tersely declared, on stage in front of a ton of people, including Michael Feinstein, mind you, that I was just, quote, way too girl next door to make the song work. I swear to God, with the way he said girl next door, he could have said homely potato, and the meaning would have been the same. I knew, and everyone in that hall knew, that he was calling me simultaneously unattractive and void of personality. I wanted to die right then and there, but I had to hold it together for the next 20 minutes of the masterclass. After that, he barely even tried to workshop the song with me, and despite trying my best, I couldn't really come back from being told that I'm intrinsically not capable of doing this song that I had already put hours into producing. I went on to study opera, so it's not like he made me swear off performing forever, but it really did affect my self-image. In my head, I'll forever be the homely potato girl next door. Thanks, Mark. Story 57. Rudest, Tyra Banks. There was a single bathroom in a Starbucks in Beverly Hills where I had to do a coffee run for work. Went in, ordered coffee, and had to use the restroom. Waited a bit from the door. She comes barging out after using it. I was 5 feet or so from it, and by this time there was a line of people waiting to use it. It was a little packed, but I attempted to make room for her to walk by. She says, "Excuse you," and pushes me. It's not that there wasn't enough room to walk by, and to this day I'm confused why she did it. The bathroom smelled like a huge crap when I went in after her though, so there's that. Kind of celebrity? Chris Martin of Coldplay. I worked at a certain place in Santa Monica that hosted high-end celebrities and investors from time to time. We had a single bathroom before he arrived, and unfortunately, I clogged it right before we shut down the place for his and his son's arrival. Couldn't get it back up and running, but I told the only other guy who worked with me at the time, quote, "There's no way he's going to use our single toilet. He's only going to be there a half hour or so, tops." Everything went fine. He was really personable, and we bantered a bit. Afterwards, and on his way out the back door, I'm walking him back and we start walking by the bathroom. He exclaims, "Ooh, quick bathroom break," and goes in to use it before I can stop him. After about 10 minutes, he comes out. "Sorry, mate, but I think I clogged your toilet. I apologize." I insist on him not worrying about it, for which he apologized more. I walk him out the back. He and his son get in the car and he leaves. I go back inside. My coworker starts losing his crap after hearing the whole exchange. "You just gaslit Chris Martin into thinking he clogged it." After telling this story, I realize my worst and best experiences with celebrities revolve around the bathroom. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. What a coincidence, right? Hearing a story about smelling Tyra Banks' poop is not something that I had on my bingo card this morning, but we're going to roll with it. Good story. Moving on. Story 58. Steven Seagal. Spotted him in a busy mall during Christmas season as a kid, and when I went to ask for a measly autograph, was promptly told, "F off, kid, I'm busy Christmas shopping." He tried waving me down after the fact, but I didn't want anything to do with him after that. So happy when South Park made fun of him and needing a safe space. Amy Buzaglo from Amy's Baking Company from Kitchen Nightmares used to come into my job all the time with her husband and demand special treatment. Then proceeded to get pissed anytime we would specifically point her out to other shoppers to waste her time that otherwise had no clue who she was. It was our petty way of getting back at her, yet she still proceeded to show back up frequently. Probably because we gave her stardom of some form. On the flip side, all other celebs I've met are saints. Alice Cooper. Saw this man in all-pink golf attire in a gas station. Politely asked if he was Alice Cooper. Responded with, "Why, yes, I am," and shook my hand. Then bought me a Dr. Pepper. Felt like something straight out of Wayne's World. George Takei is a neighbor of mine and one of the sweetest people you could ever hope to meet. Extremely nice at all times when spotted. Story 59. So, I don't have any myself, but my dad had a few good stories from over the years. He worked as an animal chiropractor in the Bay Area, and his practice was mostly equine, cats and dogs, occasionally a few more exotic patients. His big jerk story was Joe Montana's wife. Dad and his assistant arrived to adjust horses and no one was there. So they were sitting on a bench outside the barn when Joe and his wife came riding up. Mrs. Montana asked if Dad was the chiropractor. Dad said he was, and she snarked, "Well, you're here for us." Great start. They got the horses unsaddled. Dad was starting his exam while Mrs. Montana gave him the horse's history while he did the motion palpitation, and apparently Dad wasn't paying enough attention because she asked if he was listening. Dad said he was. She played the "well then, what did I just say" card, and Dad repeated what she had told him, word for word. She didn't like that, but couldn't really say anything. Conversely, Joe was a heck of a nice guy and chatted with him while his wife fumed. Dad's favorite chiropractic story to tell, though, was how he was adjusting horses for a new client, just a regular guy in jeans and boots, and spent the whole time talking and joking with this super cool, down-to-earth guy. They finished the adjustments, dude shook his hand, thanked him with a big smile. Dad and his assistant went on their way, and as soon as they were out of earshot, his assistant starts gushing about Superman. It was Christopher Reeves. Dad spent a good half hour shooting the breeze with Chris Reeves and never realized. He always said Chris was one of the nicest guys he had ever met. He also met Steve Irwin while he was guest lecturing in Australia and didn't figure out who it was until years later. Dad was sightseeing with a group of vets and chiropractors and they went to the Australia Zoo. They were in the petting zoo area hanging out with the wallabies and wombats and noticed some staff nearby. One thing about chiropractors is that they can't not do their jobs. I swear, anytime my dad met an animal, any animal, he'd start motion palpation out of habit. Anyway, with the dogs, they'd be all over him wanting attention and he'd just automatically start an exam. Anyway, they asked if they could do motion palpation on the animals, and one of the staff said, while he doubted they would sit still for it, go ahead. True to form for Dad, within minutes he had every animal in the paddock crawling all over him as he did his thing. He ended up chatting with the staff members, and they were actually impressed that Dad adjusted horses for a living. Years later, I'm watching The Crocodile Hunter, and Dad goes, "Hey, I met him in Australia." Mind you, I had heard the petting zoo story multiple times by this point. Steve Irwin was, and still is, one of my biggest heroes, so I was furious to find out my dad met him and never knew who he was. And it absolutely tracks for me that Steve Irwin, who tackled frickin' crocodiles from the deck of a boat and wrangled venomous snakes without hesitation, thought it was so cool that my dad adjusted horses and household pets. Story 60. Kanye. So no surprise there though. Maybe Ricky Gervais. But truth is, he gets to be. And once he realized I was not his manager knocking, he apologized profusely for cursing me out through the door, lol. The guy who used to voice/puppeteer Elmo sexually harassed me as Elmo while at work. That moment made my brain overload and I just had to walk away. Too much to process at once. When I was expecting none of it, he and Elmo were hidden behind a couch, I had no idea such a large man voiced Elmo. Puppets are weird, and the sexual comments from a large man lying on the floor using a child's voice while puppeting is just too much for the human brain. He got fired for that type of bad, and much worse within a few years, so there's that. Best celeb ever? Curtis Jackson. 50 Cent. He's the most down-to-earth, humble, sweet, respectful celeb by leaps and bounds. So, notably, I'd say he's one of the best people I've had the luxury of interacting with in general. He's the real deal with a good heart. Also, Mike Birbiglia is of course a fantastic, always funny, respectful man to work with. Julia Moore, when not swamped with people, first met her in a bathroom at my workplace, then almost physically ran into her leaving a restroom at an airport in another country, lol, small world. As two humans in the work environment, she's an absolute gem of a person. When swarmed by people just staring, she of course has to keep her guard up and is uncomfortable. Meeting her relaxed and chill in a celeb-safe environment, she can be her naturally warm, sweet self, who's chatty in the best/fun way. But being spotted in a public place, you could feel the energy of the crowd, how I noticed last second before we both almost smashed heads when I looked up. And seeing how unsettled she was by the crowd made me sad for her or anyone who has to live like that, who isn't into that being stared at by everyone in the middle school lunchroom kind of way. She's definitely the type that loves her profession of acting. I'd very much doubt she cares for the mass fame part. She very much just likes striking up conversations with people in a way that any genuinely friendly person does. And Santa Gold is a sweetheart. Gotta give her a shout out. Oh, and by the way, everyone in NYC industry knew about Puff Daddy decades ago. Decades! I've waited far too long for this tower of crap to come crashing down. Oh, and apparently the awesome Curtis Jackson is happily producing a doc on P. Diddy because he too does not like horrible people and will spend the money to make sure baddies lose. Curtis Jackson is legit. Story 61. Tom Brady. I didn't technically meet him, but I was 2 tables over. I was visiting friends near Martha's Vineyard, and we went to a restaurant. Tom Brady was there, as was Bill Murray. They just happened to be there at the same time, but were eating separately with people. I personally didn't try to interact with them because they were eating a meal and I'm sure they wanted to eat in peace. A little kid went to get an autograph from Tom Brady. This was before Brady left New England to go to Tampa Bay. Kid was probably about 6 years old and he was very well mannered. Asked Brady if he could please have his autograph because he was his biggest fan, and Brady said no. Says if he wants his autograph, he goes to events to sign them, and that his parents should have known better. Brady said all this pretty loudly. Parents were mortified. Don't get me wrong, I get it. Celebrities need to have boundaries. But to be fair, there was nobody else asking Brady for anything. Nobody was taking secret pictures from what I could see or anything like that. Signing a single autograph for this little kid would not have started a stampede or anything. Bill Murray, on the other hand, overheard what was going on and asked if the kid had ever watched Ghostbusters. Kiddo said yes, but couldn't figure out who Bill Murray was, because, well, he's aged a bit. Murray pretended to be heartbroken and laughed it off, and the parents pulled up pictures on their phones, particularly whichever one it was with Slimer. The kid knew who he was then and was excited. Murray signed some autographs, took some selfies with him, and got the little one feeling better. Story 62. Time to Shine, former stand-in/extra in Hollywood for about 9 years. Let's go down the list. Allegedly. John Oliver, dick. Alyssa Milano, her hairdresser on Mistresses, unalived himself. Didn't seem too bothered. Julianne Hough, worked with her during the blackface controversy. She's okay, but she's the type who's a 5 out of 10 who thinks she's a 10 out of 10. You're very average, honey. Nick Bishop, dick. Can't keep it in his pants. David Caruso, dick. For no reason even, just pissy. Jerry Ryan, ice queen. Brian Callen, dick. Dax Shepard, dick. Crashed his motorcycle into a pole on the Santa Monica Pier in front of the crew and spectators. Crew loved it, made their season. Some black-haired guy producer on This Is Us pilot, dick. Casting agents who were former child actors, resentful dicks. Most D-list actors on their first regular gig, dicks. Crew members whose dads got them jobs, ungrateful dicks. Chevy Chase, dick. David Boreanaz from Bones, dick. Quite the yeller. Got a PA fired because he was in wet clothes too long. Lauren Graham and Alexis Bledel from Gilmore Girls, entitled a-holes who openly called the extras cockroaches in front of them. Whoever made these two below average and looks women leads should be banned from the industry. Kevin Spacey, the rumors are true. Julian Jacobs, not bad, but showed up at the Community Season 2 wrap party in sweats and no makeup and refused to take pictures with anyone. These crew guys put up with her bullcrap all season and she can't even take a picture at a wrap party. Lame. Nobody else on the cast had a problem taking pics with the crew members. Lindsay Lohan, ruined crap just to be a brat. Justin Priestley showed up to set drunk. Sarah Michelle Gellar, not me, but was told this story. She was the original choice to play Rogue in the first X-Men film. The set security agent was told that a rando was going to be on set, observing, and to leave him alone. Well, apparently SMG was a total diva that day. She was cursing people and being terrible. So the guy was a producer for Bryan Singer, and he left at lunch. Anna Paquin ended up getting the gig. SMG pleaded and wrote letters to the X-Men producers, but to no avail. Then, apparently, Anna Paquin's name was not to be mentioned on set, or our star would have a meltdown. If I remembered more, I'll edit this list. Story 63. Art Garfunkel is a piece of crap. Stayed at a hotel I used to work at about a decade ago and was a crotchety effing decaying dick to the entire staff from the front desk to housekeeping to the restaurant. He was demanding as F and called the hotel from his room demanding to know why he hadn't received his cheesecake and milk that he had rudely called the restaurant for without leaving a name or room number, as if they just magically knew it was him. He was there for a concert downtown, and his piss-poor quality as a person has ruined Simon and Garfunkel for me for good. I can barely hear the first few notes of Sounds of Silence without becoming disturbed. Ha! The entire band and staff he had with him was apologizing to all of us for the way he acted, as he just left a trail of crap talking in unfounded lectures. This mother effer looked me in the eyes as I personally brought him what he'd asked for, despite it not even being my department, and he had the old shriveled balls of audacity to tell me, with quote, and I'll never forget, "We spend too much time apologizing when we could just get it right the first time. F that effing guy." Nicest celebrity is Mike Allstott, who has his family foundation golf tournament and auction with us every year for the past few years, and is always a genuine and respectful and gracious to everyone he interacts with. He truly is an example of a football player who stayed faithful to his hometown fans, plus his kids are just as chill, which is refreshing for rich kids. He coached the football team of a local school for a few years after he retired from the NFL, and I know several people who have just run into him at a bar or around town, and he's as cool then as he is to our staff. Genuine class act. Story 64. I've met a range of famous people in various settings. Haven't had any bad experiences. Some of the ones that stuck with me, that were more than just a hello, are: Pink was extremely nice to my friend and I. She had just released her first hit and was performing at an intimate event. After she performed her set, she walked out into the crowd and came over to us and asked where the bar was. We pointed it out and she said thank you. To our surprise, after she got her drink, she came back to us and thanked us again for our help. It was probably so insignificant to her, but my friend and I remember it well. Michael Bolton was so kind to me and my sibling when we ran into him as kids. He spent time talking with us and gave us signed pictures of him. He also asked if we wanted to take a picture, but that was back before cell phones and we didn't have a camera with us. I regret not having a camera to this day. Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen came into a place I worked as a teenager and were so friendly. They talked with anyone who came up to them. I remember them holding hands most of the time and they seemed really happy together. John Bon Jovi was walking on the street of NYC and randomly stopped and turned to me to ask a question. I stared at him in disbelief and he just laughed. I was so embarrassed, but he took it in stride. I don't even know what he asked me. He wished me a great day and smiled and went on his way. I was frozen and couldn't move for a couple minutes. To him, it was nothing, but to me, it was some of the best moments of my life. Al Gore was super nice, but at one point he started talking to me in Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish. It was kind of weird. Cam Newton was super friendly and had an artistic vibe to him, even as a 22-year-old. I remember thinking he could be an artist or in advertising. Andrea Bocelli was so friendly to me and my family. He reached out to hold my grandmother's hand and didn't let it go. He's blind, so I think it was his way of showing he was engaged and interested in what she had to say. I will always remember that he said he liked my speaking voice. My grandmother couldn't wait to tell all her old lady friends about him and his nice hands. Gary Delabate was super nice to talk with. He's someone who could talk to you about anything. Unfortunately, he had to leave where we were to go to another event. If he didn't have to leave, I feel like he would have talked to us for hours. Tommy Lasorda was so nice to me at an airport. I was expecting him to be gruff, but he wasn't. He handed me a signed baseball, even though I didn't ask for it. I wish I knew where it was. R.I.P. Tommy. Story 65. Peyton Manning. My first job in high school was summer staffing for the athletic facility at a private college in Indiana. For years, we hosted training camp for the Indianapolis Colts, and there's a whole book worth of horror stories about what an absolute prick Peyton Manning is. My brother worked there before me, and Peyton walked up to him once without saying a word and just used my brother's shirt to wipe his, Peyton's, sweat from his face and walked away. They had scrimmages where fans would watch and stay and do meet and greets with the players, and I watched Peyton scream in my manager's face to, quote, "Get these kids the F out of his sight." One morning, a coworker was jogging on the track at the facility, and he showed up and told her to get the F out, that she couldn't be there. She kept jogging and basically said, "I work here, leave me alone." And he pulled the, "Do you know who I am?" And she said no and kept running. Lots of other famous players from that time couldn't have been nicer. Dallas Clark would take little kids on a golf cart and tell them stories and jokes. Reggie Wayne absolutely delighted in talking to both fans and us employees. Peyton Manning sucks. So this one's a bit surprising, I have to admit. Peyton Manning seems like a pretty stand-up, authentic, good old boy, but it turns out, apparently according to this story, he's just putting on a front for the cameras. Of course, you can't believe everyone's stories on here, but still, I mean, we got to give it a shred of credibility, and yeah, that's surprising to hear that Peyton Manning's kind of a jerk. Story 66. I was coming back to the studio after lunch, and as I was about to enter the front door, I see Lou Ferrigno walking towards the door. I was a huge fan, grew up watching the Hulk, and admired him as a bodybuilder. I smiled and got ready to say hi to him, but he saw me and wanted none of it. Shot me a look like, "Don't even effing think about talking to me." Either that or he has resting, "I'm gonna rip off your head and crap down your neck" face. Needless to say, I didn't open my mouth. The two nicest were Trent Reznor and George Clooney. Trent was grocery shopping with his GF at the time, and we had a really great 5-minute conversation. Super nice guy. For the other story, I was in the lobby of an office building next to a large studio. I'd just gotten out of an elevator and was heading for the front when a mob of what looked like 100 yuppies, men and women in suits, carrying briefcases and most on cell phones, burst through the front doors. They were all oblivious to me and were coming right at me. I had nowhere to go, so just stood there as they all bumped into me rudely from all sides, not even acknowledging me when right in the center of them, up steps George Clooney right in front of me. He looks up and says, "Oh, excuse me," steps politely around me, and then I proceeded to get shouldered and jostled by the rest of the yuppies. He was the only one who said excuse me. Class act. Story 67. In 1989, when I was 21, OJ approached me with my then fiance at a restaurant bar in West LA. He stepped right in front of my guy, who himself is 6'5", as if he was not there, and began talking to me for what ended up being several hours. He literally would not leave me alone. He then followed me to my table for dinner and sat down in an empty chair next to my soon-to-be brother-in-law, ordered drinks, and told us stories for the entire dinner. It was an incredibly obnoxious intrusion, but at the time, he was so charming, it was hard to just tell him to sod off. He talked about Nicole, his older 2 children, primarily his son, who was close to my age and playing college football at that time. He was absolutely the most persistent man I've ever encountered. He was stunned that despite his best efforts, I did, in fact, love my fiancé and was not interested in his advances. Right before the check came, he walked to the back of the restaurant, picked up a different blonde, winked at me, and left. He did pay for the drinks. At the time, I was too young to fully understand how odd it was that he spent so much time trying to get my attention. When the whole nightmare went down in '94, I said immediately, no way this guy gets convicted. His charisma was next level. I have since met many famous people, and OJ's confidence remains second to none. In my opinion, professional athletes have much more social confidence than actors, musicians, or politicians. On the flip side, the loveliest celebrity I ever met, by far, was Farrah. She is also the only one I wanted to, and got, a picture with. Story 68. Sean Penn. I worked at a kind of hole-in-the-wall burger shop/bar on Wilshire in Santa Monica. This kid walks in alone, and while I'm grabbing his drink, his guest walks in and sits with his back to me, so I have no idea who I'm walking up to. I drop the drink and look to the new person, and obviously have to try and hide my shock at turning and seeing Sean effing Penn, which I clearly didn't do a good job of, because when I asked what he'd like to drink, he just looked at me like I had 4 heads and said, "Nothing, thanks," and shooed me away. LMAO! I walked away like this mother effer. I approached them maybe once or twice more, but I was never anything more than an intrusion, and they clearly met there to have whatever serious conversation they needed to have. He then went and used the women's restroom and then left out the back door. No one offered to pay for the drink. Nicest was Maya Angelou. I'd just started a job at a boutique hotel in Santa Monica, and the chef was like super into me. He kept telling me she was a regular of his and that she really loved his food, but weeks went by and I never saw her, so I started to think he was full of crap. Then one night, about 45 minutes before the restaurant closed, a tour bus pulled up to the hotel and in walks Maya. I'm the only server on the clock, and so she ended up being my table. She was incredibly kind, recognized that I was new to the hotel, and asked me genuine questions about my life. At one point, she asked me to bring the chef up so she could give her compliments, and when I brought him to the table, I started to walk away so they could speak in private. She said, "Oh no, I'd like you to stay, dear." She went on and on about the chef, how grateful of a person he was, and how she didn't just come for his food, but also for him. But don't get her wrong, the food was some of the best she'd ever had, and that I would be lucky to marry a man like that. You'll never have to cook a day in your life, my dear. Anyway, it's 14 years later. I'm married to that guy. We have an 11-year-old daughter, and she's right. I literally never have to cook unless I want to. Story 69. My favorite thing about this thread is that every comment I've read so far, people list the worst, but also the best, unprompted. I honestly don't think I've had a bad experience with any celebrities. Here's a list of good ones, though. I met Stone Cold Steve Austin at a Walmart when I was like 5, and he took the time to talk to everybody that wanted to, and treated everybody like he was happy to meet them instead of the other way around. When I was about the same age, my family went to a Mark Chestnut concert, and the night before we saw him at the hotel restaurant getting food at a buffet. My parents didn't want to be rude, but figured they could send me over to say hi. He was super nice and gave me an autograph. The next night at the show, he recognized me in the first row, had a security guy pick me up, and put his cowboy hat on my head. My dad got that signed after the show too. Years later, he was performing nearby, and my mom and I went to see him. Our house had burned down when I was in middle school, and she told a security guy the story. He absolutely didn't believe her, but went and asked Mark about it. Mark actually remembered the encounter, or was kind enough to pretend, lol, and gave us a signed guitar pick. I met Stephen Amell at a Comic-Con, dressed as the Green Arrow. He told me I looked sharp, and when I bumped into him later away from his booth, he stopped and chatted with me for a couple minutes. I'm a local rapper, and I've gotten to open for a few awesome artists. Mac Lethal was super down to earth, and happy to take a pic with me in the green room, and told me I was okay when I apologized for taking up his time. Rise Hendrix, he does reels with weird bars that are just like silly raps, but is also very good when serious. Chatted with me for like 10 minutes before the show, asking me how I chose my stage name and just joking around with me and the promoter. The show had almost nobody show up, maybe 40 people in front of the stage for him, and literally just me in front for the other openers. He put on an amazing performance and stayed after to talk to everybody. I noticed that he remembered everybody's names, made sure to use their names in convos, and genuinely treated everybody like a close personal friend. My last show was an Afroman show, and he stayed after to take a pic with everybody that wanted one, no extra charge, and he signed a pack of rolling papers for me. I told him how surreal it was for me to get the opportunity to open for him, and he thanked me for helping make it a good show. He also took a hit off a blunt that I rolled, which almost feels like more of a flex than performing at his show, LMAO. I have others, but I'll leave it at that, because I didn't expect to type so much, and I technically didn't even answer the question, LOL. In a world full of a-hole celebrities, I've been very lucky so far to only have good experiences. Story 70. I worked at a restaurant that had a lot of famous clientele. There is a hard rule that we were never to acknowledge a celebrity and just had to treat them like any other customer. Everyone was mostly nice/polite, but I remember Calvin Klein coming in every week and just being very disinterested. Not rude, just not very warm or friendly. Heard from coworkers that Glenn Close was super rude, as was Lou Reed. Still love him though. Natasha Lyonne came in once and just came off as snobby. Julianne Moore came in all the time and was kinda snobby too. I watched another diner come up to her and say she was a huge fan, and Julianne looked super annoyed, sarcastically thanked her, then completely ignored her. Friendliest, nicest celebs that came in were Seth Meyers, always smiling, super polite, also so cute, Amy Poehler, so warm, and Aaron Paul, super laid back and sweet and would tip a lot. Other notably sweet ones were Kate Winslet. Fun story, my very first table during my very first shift as a server was Kate. She ordered scrambled eggs and brown toast. She's also gorgeous IRL. Will Arnett and Emma Stone. A lesser-known celeb, but one of my favorite encounters of all time was with Jeff Magnum from the band Neutral Milk Hotel, who came into another restaurant I was working at where there actually weren't any rules about approaching and talking to celebrities. It was not a common experience like at the other restaurant. He was ordering takeaway from me and pointed out one of my tattoos referencing an artist and complimented it. I then said something like, "Sorry if this is weird, but I'm just a really big fan and it's so nice to meet you." He immediately lit up and started chatting with me and asking about my life, like we were already acquainted. Then, after he had already tipped on his bill, as he was leaving, he shook my hand and gave me another $10 in cash. It's not much, but it was super sweet, and I was genuinely surprised because he's sort of known to be very private and reclusive. Story 71. Wynonna Judd. In the 80s, when the Judds were so popular, my friend and I went to see them in concert with Randy Travis. We were early and went to a nearby diner. In walks Naomi Judd with a bunch of bodyguard-type men. She came by our booth and noticed that my friend had a plaster cast with Sawyer Brown painted on it. She stopped and asked Lisa about her accident and broken bone. She was formerly an orthopedic nurse. She sat in our booth, talking to Lisa like they were best friends. I was shy and starstruck, so I didn't say much. She was so sweet. As she sat there, Wynonna walked in and started to walk past the booth, and Naomi said she'd like her to meet us. She huffed out a big breath, tossed her hair over her shoulder, and turned her nose up in the air when she walked away. I got the feeling they were arguing or something. We finished our meal and left, still with more time to kill. We noticed a tour bus in the hotel parking lot and went to check it out. It said RT1 on the windshield. At 16, I was such a huge Randy Travis fan. He was my crush. I thought he must be staying at the hotel. Lisa took pictures of me posing in front of the bus, pointing at the RT1 sign. Then, I sat on top of the bus while she took some more pictures. I hear a knock and jump up. Randy Travis opened the door. He was kind and friendly, much like Naomi. He talked to Lisa, and me, I guess, but I wasn't talking, for several minutes. He says, "Nice to meet you, young lady." I stammered in the most awkward way and said, Julie." I'm sure I left a lasting impression. Story 72. I manage high-end restaurants for a living, so I've met a lot of celebrities. Marissa Tomei, Conan O'Brien, Owen Wilson, Benedict Cumberbatch, John Cena, Cat Williams, and Michael Douglas were especially kind and friendly. In the middle were all the actors from The Walking Dead and Stranger Things. Not sure who because I didn't watch either show. Donald Glover, Miranda Otto, Charlie Day, Remy Malik, Dax Shepard and Kristen Bell, and Harrison Ford. There's a handful of football and basketball players. I don't follow sports. I'm a huge fan of RHOA, so I was excited to meet Portia, her sister Lauren, Kim Zolciak, and Shemaya. Kim used to leave my old boss drunk voice texts, which he would play for me. I love that. The worst were Jessica Alba, Tom Cruise, Usher, Drake, and Samuel L. Jackson. I did not recognize Samuel L. Jackson. He refused to speak to me directly and had his dining companion act as a translator. So he would tell her, Ask her if they can make this without pork, when I could hear him perfectly, and then she would repeat the question. I would reply to his face while he refused to make eye contact and ignored me, and she would repeat my responses to him. It was ridiculously rude. I'll be honest, I got tired of his crap after he asked for a fifth item to be made without pork. I get not eating pork, no issues there, but he was only asking about dishes that were already prepared with pork, so impossible to remove, while ignoring all the items I suggested that were made without it. Our chef was well known for his love of pork. There was a sandwich on the lunch menu that was pulled pork, applewood smoked bacon, and coleslaw with bacon beer jam and bacon fat aioli on a brioche roll. Exasperated, I told him, our chef is well known for his pork dishes and he uses a lot of it in his menus. Not apologizing, just simply stating facts. He was not happy with that response and told her to tell me they were leaving. I smiled and said goodbye. Hope you have a good night. At first, our chef was like, "What did you say to him? Do you know who that was?" Which, no, I honestly did not. Then I told him he doesn't eat pork and said there's too much pork on the menu. Chef got all proud, like, damn straight there's a ton of pork on my menu. Go suck an egg, LMAO. The most embarrassing part for me was that I had just watched a movie he was in the night before, literally less than 24 hours before this exchange happened. 1408. It's okay, but not great. Story 73. About 11 years ago, my family and I traveled from our home in Florida to the city that never sleeps, NYC, to visit my Aunt Rita for a week. She had just moved into this temporary new expensive apartment unit in the lawn care building in Manhattan and wanted us to experience the views of the city from her windows, then tour the shops of Times Square. My only knowledge of NYC only came from movies and TV shows, so I was very excited for this trip. We chose to visit her in early May since Florida was dealing with massive heat waves at the time, and it wasn't near any major holidays. Once we got there, it was amazing. The tall, pretty buildings gave the city a certain vibe that couldn't be replaced. Our second night there, we got a taxi down to Harlem and had dinner at some cute little boardwalk-style pizzeria that I'd recommend to anyone I know if I remembered the name of it. Service was great, everything was positive there, until we started hearing yelling and cursing from this lady with very greasy blonde hair and huge sunglasses, sitting alone in the booth behind us. She was on the phone with somebody yelling, "You have no idea who I am, female dog. I was in 10 movies and make millions more than you. If you don't pick me up on whatever this street is by whatever time she said, I'll F you up in front of everyone that watches." My aunt was furious over the type of language my sister and I kept hearing from that lady and yelled, "Ma'am, if you can't watch your mouth while these kids are trying to eat, take it outside," at her. Then this lady started screaming at us and said, "Hun, I don't give a F how old they are. You should be talking to them about puberty because they'll be just as bad as me, you ugly smut." My aunt grew up in Philly and never took BS like that from anyone. "You want to talk about my family? We can bring this to the curb," my aunt yelled back. The lady stood up, got real close to my aunt's face and said, "You'll never touch me, female dog. I'm famous," before storming out of the restaurant. One of the waitresses came over to our booth and apologized to us, then explained to us how that lady actually was in movies and starred in many Nickelodeon shows. "You do realize that was Amanda Bynes, right?" the waitress said to my aunt. "Her? There's no way Amanda would act that way in front of children after making shows and movies for them," my aunt responded. As a 2000s kid that has seen Hairspray and What I Like About You many times, I was shook for a long time after that. A few weeks after we got back home to Florida, we saw in the news that Amanda was arrested for throwing something dangerous out of her window onto the street below. My mother told me sometime after that Amanda was experiencing trauma that couldn't be explained by anybody and lashed out on people because she was tired of living a fake life. I wouldn't call it a rude encounter, even though it was, but I'd call it a learning experience of how Hollywood burns people out. I'm very glad Amanda's turning her life around and found a better path for herself. I just hope she never feels the harsh pressure of having to entertain anyone again. Hollywood is a dungeon.